When we think of the age of dinosaurs, our minds conjure images of towering giants striding across ancient landscapes, their thunderous footsteps echoing through primeval forests. We imagine vast herds of herbivores grazing peacefully while monstrous predators lie in wait, poised to strike. This vision has been reinforced by countless films, documentaries, and books that portray dinosaurs as the unchallenged masters of their domain, creatures so powerful and dominant that they existed in a world shaped entirely by their presence and their needs. The very phrase "Age of Dinosaurs" suggests a time when these magnificent reptiles ruled supreme, when their size and strength guaranteed them safety from all but the largest of their own kind. It is a narrative of dominance, of creatures so perfectly adapted to their environment that they faced no meaningful challenges beyond the competition among themselves for food, territory, and mates. But this comfortable narrative, this vision of simple supremacy, is fundamentally incomplete. The reality of life during the Mesozoic era was far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more interconnected than popular imagination has led us to believe. The fossil record, that fragmentary but invaluable window into deep time, tells a very different story. It reveals a world not of simple dominance but of intricate webs of interaction, where every creature, regardless of size or strength, navigated a landscape filled with threats both obvious and hidden. The dinosaurs, for all their magnificence and evolutionary success, were not exempt from the fundamental rules that govern all life. They were born vulnerable, they grew under constant threat, and even in their prime, they faced dangers that could come from the most unexpected sources. This documentary will take you on a journey through that more complete, more accurate vision of the Mesozoic world. We will explore the manifold dangers that shaped dinosaur lives from their first moments in the egg to their final days as adults. We will examine the predators that specialized in hunting the young and vulnerable, the parasites that drained their energy day by day, the ambush hunters that lurked at the edges of their world, and the countless other threats that made survival a constant challenge. We will see how size, while certainly an advantage in many situations, was no guarantee of safety. We will discover how the smallest creatures could pose threats as serious in their own way as the largest predators. And we will come to understand the age of dinosaurs not as a time of simple reptilian dominance, but as an era of extraordinary complexity, where every species existed within a network of relationships that included competition, predation, parasitism, and constant adaptation to ever-present dangers. The story begins, as all dinosaur stories must, at the very beginning of life itself. The vulnerability of dinosaurs started long before they took their first breath or hatched from their first egg. It began the moment their parents selected a nesting site, a choice that would determine whether their offspring would survive to see the world or perish before ever experiencing it. Dinosaur nests, by their very nature, represented concentrated resources in a world where many creatures struggled to find their next meal. A single nest might contain dozens of eggs, each one a package of protein and nutrients encased in a shell that, while protective, was not impenetrable. For many predators, both large and small, these nests represented an opportunity too valuable to ignore, a seasonal bounty that could sustain them through difficult times or allow them to raise their own young successfully. The fossil record has provided us with remarkable evidence of the dangers that threatened dinosaur nests. In various locations across the globe, paleontologists have discovered fossils that capture moments of ancient predation, frozen in stone for millions of years. These fossils tell stories of cunning, of opportunity seized, and of the constant pressure that nesting dinosaurs faced from creatures that saw their eggs not as the next generation of mighty reptiles, but simply as food. The predators that raided dinosaur nests came in many forms, from creatures we might expect to pose such a threat to others that would surprise us with their audacity and specialized adaptations. One of the most striking pieces of evidence for nest predation comes from India, where paleontologists discovered a fossil that captures a moment of drama from approximately 67 million years ago. The fossil shows a snake, not a small garden snake, but a substantial serpent measuring several feet in length, positioned directly among a clutch of sauropod eggs. This was not a case of a snake accidentally wandering into a nest site. The position of the skeleton, the relationship between the snake and the eggs, and the context of the discovery all point to a single remarkable conclusion. This snake was in the process of raiding the nest when it died, preserved for eternity in the very act of seeking out dinosaur eggs. The snake in question belongs to a group that has no exact modern parallel, though its behavior would have been familiar to anyone who has observed contemporary egg-eating snakes. These ancient serpents had evolved specialized techniques for locating, accessing, and consuming eggs that were often larger than their own heads. The mechanics of how a snake consumes an egg much larger than seems physically possible is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. The snake's jaw, incredibly flexible and able to disconnect at multiple points, could stretch to accommodate eggs that appeared impossibly large. Once the egg was inside the snake's throat, specialized vertebrae with downward-pointing projections would crack the shell, allowing the snake to consume the nutritious contents while regurgitating the shell fragments. But this particular fossil tells us something even more interesting than simply that snakes ate dinosaur eggs. The presence of this snake among these specific eggs suggests that nest predation was not an opportunistic behavior, not a matter of a hungry snake stumbling across an unguarded nest by pure chance. Instead, the evidence suggests a degree of specialization, an evolutionary adaptation specifically for exploiting dinosaur nests. These snakes may have timed their own reproductive cycles to coincide with dinosaur nesting seasons, ensuring that their young would hatch when food was most abundant. They may have developed enhanced sensory capabilities for locating nests, using heat-sensing organs to detect the warmth of incubating eggs or following chemical cues to find nesting grounds. The implications of this specialized predation are profound. Dinosaurs, even the largest sauropods that would grow to be among the biggest land animals ever to exist, began their lives in a state of extreme vulnerability. Their parents, despite their enormous size and strength, could not protect every egg every moment of every day. The very biology of dinosaurs, the fact that they laid eggs rather than giving birth to live young, meant that the earliest stage of life occurred outside the mother's body, in a location that could be found, accessed, and exploited by predators. This vulnerability was compounded by the nesting behavior of many dinosaur species. Evidence suggests that numerous dinosaurs, like many modern reptiles and birds, returned to the same nesting grounds year after year. This behavior, known as site fidelity, makes sense from the perspective of the nesting dinosaurs. A site that had proven successful in the past, where eggs had hatched and young had survived, would naturally be chosen again. Why take risks with an untested location when proven grounds were available? But this predictability, this return to familiar nesting areas, also meant that predators could learn where and when to find concentrated populations of vulnerable eggs. Imagine, if you will, a nesting ground used by a population of large sauropods. These dinosaurs, measuring perhaps 60 feet from head to tail and weighing many tons, would have been nearly invulnerable as adults. Few predators would have dared to attack a healthy adult sauropod. But once a year, perhaps during a particular season when temperatures and rainfall were optimal, these giants would congregate at traditional nesting sites. The females would dig pits in the earth, deposit their eggs, and then cover them with vegetation and soil. Some species may have remained to guard the nests, but others, particularly the very largest sauropods, likely could not stay. Their food requirements were simply too great. A herd of giant sauropods remaining in one location for the weeks or months required for eggs to hatch would have stripped the area of all vegetation, creating a desert where a forest had once stood. So the adults would leave, driven by the necessity of feeding their enormous bodies, and the nests would be left vulnerable. This was when the predators would arrive. Snakes would emerge from the surrounding vegetation, drawn by chemical cues or perhaps by the slight warmth emanating from the decomposing vegetation covering the nests, which generated heat as it broke down, helping to incubate the eggs. These snakes would dig through the covering material, locate the eggs beneath, and begin the process of consuming them one by one. A single snake might take several eggs over the course of days or weeks, returning repeatedly to a nest that represented a reliable food source. But snakes were far from the only threat to dinosaur nests. The fossil record and comparative biology suggest a whole community of nest predators, each with their own techniques and specializations. Small dinosaurs themselves likely raided the nests of larger species. We have evidence of small theropods, some no larger than chickens, that lived in the same environments as much larger dinosaurs. These small, quick, intelligent creatures would have been perfectly capable of identifying nests, waiting for opportunities when the guarding parent was distracted or absent, and darting in to snatch an egg or, later in the incubation period, a helpless hatchling. Early mammals, too, played a role in this drama of survival and predation. While we will explore mammalian predation on dinosaurs in greater detail later, it is worth noting here that mammals of the Mesozoic were far more diverse and capable than the popular image of tiny, shrew-like creatures hiding in the shadows would suggest. Some of these mammals were substantial animals, weighing several pounds or more, with strong jaws and sharp teeth perfectly suited for cracking eggs or killing small prey. These mammals, active primarily at night when many dinosaurs would have been less alert, could approach nests under cover of darkness, their excellent sense of smell guiding them to the hidden treasures beneath the soil and vegetation. The eggs themselves varied enormously in size, depending on the species of dinosaur that laid them. Some of the smallest dinosaur eggs discovered were no larger than a songbird's egg, while others could be the size of a volleyball. But even the largest dinosaur eggs were not as large as we might expect given the size of the adults that laid them. There's a physical limit to how large an egg can be while still allowing oxygen to diffuse through the shell to the developing embryo inside and allowing the hatchling to eventually break free. This meant that even the largest dinosaurs began life as relatively small creatures, facing a long and dangerous journey from hatchling to adult. The dangers that threatened dinosaur eggs intensified as hatching time approached. The developing embryos inside the eggs would begin to move, to make sounds, to use their egg tooth to chip away at the shell from the inside. These signs of imminent hatching would have been detectable to predators with keen senses. The small sounds, the slight movements of eggs as the inhabitants shifted position, the chemical changes as the eggs began to crack, all of these cues would have alerted predators that the eggs were reaching their most vulnerable moment. An egg about to hatch represented an even richer prize than an egg earlier in incubation. The developing dinosaur inside was now almost fully formed, essentially a complete meal simply waiting to be extracted from its calcium carbonate container. For the hatchlings that did successfully break free of their eggs, the dangers did not diminish. In fact, in many ways, they intensified. A hatchling dinosaur was mobile, which meant it could potentially flee from danger, but it was also exposed, no longer protected by even the minimal defense of an eggshell. The first hours and days of a hatchling's life were perhaps the most dangerous period in the entire lifespan of a dinosaur. The tiny creatures, often only inches long even if they would eventually grow to dozens of feet, were vulnerable to an enormous range of predators. Birds, if they had evolved by this point in the Mesozoic, would have found hatchling dinosaurs to be ideal prey. Lizards, snakes, early mammals, small theropod dinosaurs, crocodilians, and numerous other predators would all have viewed hatchling dinosaurs as nothing more than convenient meals. Some dinosaur species appear to have addressed this vulnerability through parental care. We have evidence, both from fossils and from the structure of nests, that some dinosaurs remained with their young for extended periods after hatching. Fossils of adult dinosaurs found in association with juveniles of varying ages suggest family groups where parents protected and perhaps even fed their offspring. This behavior, which we see in many modern birds and crocodilians, would have significantly increased the survival rate of hatchlings. An adult dinosaur, even a relatively small one, could drive away most of the predators that would threaten hatchlings. The presence of a parent meant safety, at least from the smaller and more numerous threats, but not all dinosaurs appear to have practiced parental care. Some, particularly among the very largest species, may have adopted what we might call a quantity over quality strategy. They laid large numbers of eggs, perhaps dozens or even hundreds over the course of a breeding season, and then left them to develop on their own. The vast majority of these eggs and hatchlings would perish, consumed by the army of predators that awaited them. But the sheer number of eggs meant that some, through luck or by hatching in a particularly safe location, would survive. Those that did survive the gauntlet of predators during their first days and weeks had a chance of reaching a size where they were less vulnerable, where their growth began to outpace the threat posed by smaller predators. This brings us to a crucial understanding about dinosaur life history. Growth rates varied enormously among dinosaur species, but many dinosaurs, particularly the large species, grew remarkably quickly during their juvenile years. A sauropod hatchling that weighed perhaps a few pounds could, within a few years, grow to weigh hundreds of pounds or more. This rapid growth was essential for survival. Every day that a young dinosaur survived meant it was larger, stronger, and harder to kill. There was an intense evolutionary pressure to grow quickly, to pass through the vulnerable juvenile stage as rapidly as possible and reach a size where fewer predators posed a threat. But this rapid growth came at a cost. Growing quickly requires enormous amounts of food. A juvenile dinosaur in a rapid growth phase would have needed to eat almost constantly, consuming as much food as it could find and process. This need to feed created its own dangers. Time spent foraging was time spent exposed, time when a young dinosaur was not hidden safely in a burrow or under dense vegetation. The drive to eat to fuel the incredible growth rates that would lead to eventual safety, forced young dinosaurs to take risks, to venture into open areas where food was more abundant, but where predators also had clearer sight lines. The landscape of the Mesozoic would have been divided, from the perspective of a young dinosaur, into areas of relative safety and areas of danger. Dense vegetation, rocky outcrops with numerous hiding places, areas near water where they could quickly escape if threatened, these would have been safe zones where young dinosaurs could retreat when danger threatened. Open areas, the edges between different habitat types, clearings where visibility was high and hiding places were few, these were danger zones, places to be crossed quickly or avoided if possible. But the richest food sources were often in these danger zones. The most nutritious plants grew in areas with the most sunlight, which meant clearings and open areas. Water sources, essential for drinking and often supporting lush vegetation, were also areas where predators concentrated, knowing that prey would eventually need to come to them. Young dinosaurs therefore had to navigate a constant calculus of risk and reward, stay hidden and safe but risk starvation or at least significantly slower growth rates. Venture into more dangerous areas to access better food sources but risk predation. This calculus shifted as the dinosaurs grew. A hatchling only a few inches long would have been threatened by an enormous range of predators and therefore would have needed to be extremely cautious, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. A juvenile that had survived a few months and grown to perhaps a foot or more in length faced fewer threats. Many of the smallest predators could no longer easily overpower it. But it still needed to be wary of medium-sized predators. Only as it approached sub-adult size would it begin to find genuine safety, reaching a point where only the largest predators posed a serious threat. The concentration of young dinosaurs in particular areas would have created opportunities for specialized predators. Just as modern predators often focus on the young of prey species, knowing that juveniles are easier to catch and kill than adults, Mesozoic predators would have developed techniques specifically for hunting young dinosaurs. Some predators may have lingered near known nesting sites waiting for hatching season. Others may have learned to recognize the signs of juvenile dinosaurs, the sounds they made, the trails they left, the types of vegetation they preferred, and actively hunted for them. Among the most effective predators of young dinosaurs would have been other dinosaurs. Small to medium-sized theropods, the group that includes famous predators like Velociraptor and Deinonychus, were almost certainly significant predators of juvenile dinosaurs. These theropods had several advantages that made them particularly dangerous to young prey. They were intelligent, with relatively large brains for reptiles and evidence of sophisticated hunting behaviors. They had excellent vision, crucial for spotting small, camouflaged prey. They were fast, able to run down fleeing juveniles, and they had the tools for killing: sharp teeth, powerful jaws, and in many cases the famous curved claws on their hind feet that could be used to pin down struggling prey. We have direct evidence of theropods hunting and consuming smaller dinosaurs. Fossilized stomach contents have been found that include the remains of smaller dinosaurs, and in some cases, we have even found the fossils of predator and prey together, preserved in the moment of the hunt or its immediate aftermath. These fossils provide snapshots of the reality of life in the Mesozoic, moments when the drama of predator and prey played out in ways that led to exceptional preservation. A predator and its prey dying together, perhaps both perishing in a sudden catastrophe like a collapsing sand dune or a flash flood, leave us with evidence that goes beyond speculation and gives us direct confirmation of who ate whom. But perhaps the most insidious threats to young dinosaurs were not the obvious predators, not the theropods with their terrifying teeth and claws, but the smaller, more numerous creatures that lived in the shadows and the undergrowth. These were the opportunistic predators, the creatures that did not actively hunt dinosaurs as their primary food source but would certainly take advantage of an opportunity when it presented itself. Lizards, for instance, could easily consume newly hatched dinosaurs. A monitor lizard-type creature, some of which grew to substantial sizes during the Mesozoic, would have been perfectly capable of raiding nests, eating eggs, and consuming hatchlings. These reptiles were intelligent, had excellent chemical senses for locating prey, and were skilled at finding hidden nests. Early mammals, despite their relatively small size during much of the Mesozoic, were also significant threats to dinosaur eggs and hatchlings. The mammals of the Mesozoic have long been portrayed as insignificant creatures, cowering in the shadows of the dominant dinosaurs, emerging only at night to feed on insects and perhaps the occasional small vertebrate. This portrayal has been dramatically revised in recent years, as new fossil discoveries have revealed a much more diverse and capable mammalian fauna than previously suspected. Some of these mammals were specialized insectivores, true, but others were omnivores or even carnivores, with teeth and jaws adapted for catching and consuming vertebrate prey. The night would have been the domain of mammals in many Mesozoic ecosystems. While dinosaurs, like their bird descendants, were likely primarily diurnal, active during the day and resting at night, mammals were largely nocturnal. This meant that when darkness fell and the dinosaurs settled into sleep, a different set of predators emerged. Mammals, guided by excellent senses of smell and hearing, would have prowled the nighttime landscape, searching for food. Dinosaur nests, with their concentration of eggs radiating the faint warmth of developing embryos and the subtle chemical signatures of life, would have been like beacons to these nocturnal hunters. A mammal could approach a nest under cover of darkness, dig through the covering material with its strong claws, and access the eggs beneath, all while the parent dinosaurs slept or were away. The strategy of nocturnal egg predation would have been particularly effective against dinosaurs that did not guard their nests continuously. For species that laid their eggs and then departed, leaving the eggs to incubate in the heat of the sun or the warmth of decomposing vegetation, there would have been no defense against nighttime raiders. Even for species that did guard their nests, the cover of darkness would have provided significant advantages to mammalian predators. A single adult dinosaur, no matter how vigilant, could not watch an entire nesting ground simultaneously. While it was investigating a sound on one side of the area, a mammal could be raiding a nest on the opposite side. The fossil record has provided us with remarkable evidence of one particular mammalian predator that challenges all our previous assumptions about the relationship between mammals and dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. This creature, which we will discuss in much greater detail later, was found fossilized with the remains of a young dinosaur in its stomach, unambiguous proof that at least some Mesozoic mammals actively hunted and consumed dinosaurs. This discovery, made in China in the early 21st century, sent shock waves through the paleontological community and forced a wholesale reassessment of Mesozoic ecosystems. If mammals were capable of hunting dinosaurs, even young or small ones, then the traditional narrative of dinosaur dominance needed to be revised to acknowledge the complexity of interactions between different groups. But let us return to the broader picture of threats facing young dinosaurs, for the story we are telling is not about any single predator but about the cumulative pressure of countless threats, each one relatively minor on its own but together creating an environment where survival was a constant challenge. Water sources, as we have mentioned, were areas of particular danger. Every animal needs water, and in many Mesozoic environments, water sources may have been scarce or at least widely separated. This meant that water holes, rivers, streams, and lakes became concentration points for life. Herbivorous dinosaurs would come to drink, and predators would come both to drink and to hunt the herbivores. The edges of water bodies were particularly dangerous zones. Here, the aquatic realm met the terrestrial world, and predators adapted to both environments could strike. Crocodilians, which existed throughout the Mesozoic and in some cases grew to enormous sizes, were the masters of this transitional zone. These reptiles, which have remained remarkably consistent in their basic body plan for hundreds of millions of years, are ambush predators par excellence. They are patient, capable of remaining motionless for extended periods, submerged in water with only their eyes and nostrils visible above the surface, waiting for prey to approach within striking distance. When the moment comes, they explode into action with shocking speed, using their powerful tails to propel themselves forward, their massive jaws snapping shut with bone-crushing force. For a young dinosaur coming to the water's edge to drink, a crocodilian would have been a terrifying threat. Dinosaur would approach cautiously, aware of the danger but driven by thirst. It might scan the water's surface, looking for the telltale signs of a predator, the eyes, the ripples, the subtle wrong shape among the vegetation. But a well-camouflaged crocodilian, patient and still, could be nearly impossible to detect. The young dinosaur would lower its head to drink, its attention focused on the water before it, and in that moment of vulnerability, the crocodilian would strike. The attack would be over in seconds. The powerful jaws would close around the dinosaur's head or neck, and the crocodilian would drag its prey into the water, where it could be drowned and then torn apart. We must remember that the crocodilians of the Mesozoic included species far larger than any alive today. While modern crocodilians can certainly be dangerous to large animals, the giants of the past were in a different category entirely. Some species reached lengths of 30 feet or more, with skulls measuring several feet and teeth like daggers. These monsters could take prey the size of an adult human with ease and probably hunted much larger animals regularly. Even a juvenile hadrosaur or a sub-adult sauropod, creatures that weighed hundreds of pounds, would have been within the hunting range of the largest Mesozoic crocodilians. The fossil record contains tantalizing evidence of these interactions. We have found dinosaur bones bearing the distinctive marks of crocodilian teeth, grooves and punctures that match the spacing and shape of crocodilian dentition. In some cases, we have even found dinosaur bones in association with crocodilian fossils, suggesting that the dinosaurs died near water and their bodies were scavenged, or that they were killed by the crocodilians themselves. Some dinosaur fossils show evidence of having been in the digestive systems of crocodilians, bones with characteristic acid etching that occurs when material passes through a crocodilian gut. But crocodilians, formidable as they were, represented just one type of threat at the water's edge. The water itself hosted a variety of predators, particularly in marine or coastal environments. The seas of the Mesozoic were not ruled by dinosaurs. While dinosaurs dominated the land and took to the air in the form of birds and pterosaurs, they never successfully colonized the marine environment in the way that some other reptile groups did. The oceans were the realm of different creatures, marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs, as well as sharks and other predatory fish. For dinosaurs that lived in coastal environments, the shore represented a boundary between their world and a realm they could not fully enter. A dinosaur wading into shallow water to feed on aquatic vegetation or to cross to a nearby island would have been entering a zone where it was not the dominant force. Here, different rules applied and different predators reigned. Large marine predators could strike from the depths, seizing a dinosaur by the leg and dragging it into deeper water where it would drown. The dinosaur's adaptations, so effective on land, would be useless in the water. Its powerful legs, designed for supporting weight on land, could not propel it quickly through water. Its lungs, adapted for breathing air, would be a liability underwater. We can imagine the scene: a herd of hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs that often lived in coastal environments, wading into the shallows to feed on sea grass or other aquatic plants. The adults would be in the slightly deeper water, their long necks allowing them to reach down to the vegetation on the sea floor while their bodies remained buoyant. The juveniles would stay in the shallows, where the water was only a few inches deep, safe from most aquatic predators but still able to access some of the rich food sources the water provided. But even in these shallows, danger lurked. A juvenile shark, itself only a few feet long, could dart into the shallow water and seize a small hadrosaur, dragging it into deeper water before the adults could react. Or a plesiosaur, one of the long-necked marine reptiles that cruised through Mesozoic seas, could approach the shallows at high tide and snatch an unwary dinosaur before retreating to safer depths. The fossil record of marine deposits sometimes includes dinosaur remains, evidence that at least some dinosaurs ended up in the sea, either washed there after death or dying in coastal environments where their bodies were carried into the ocean by tides and currents. Some of these fossils show evidence of predation or scavenging by marine organisms. Bones may bear the marks of shark teeth or show signs of having been consumed by marine reptiles. These fossils remind us that the boundaries between ecosystems were not absolute. Dinosaurs, while terrestrial animals, interacted with marine environments in numerous ways, and these interactions sometimes had fatal consequences. Even away from water, young dinosaurs faced threats from the very environment itself. The Mesozoic was a time of dramatic climate variation, with periods of intense heat, severe droughts, violent storms, and other environmental extremes. While adult dinosaurs, with their large size and physiological adaptations, could often weather these extremes, juveniles were far more vulnerable. A severe drought could dry up water sources, forcing young dinosaurs to travel farther in search of water, exposing them to more predators and increasing the risk of heat stress. A violent storm could destroy nests, kill hatchlings, or separate young dinosaurs from protective adults, leaving them vulnerable to predation. Volcanic activity, which was common in many parts of the world during the Mesozoic, posed particular hazards. Volcanic eruptions could blanket vast areas in ash, suffocating animals, covering vegetation and making food scarce, and creating toxic conditions that poisoned water sources. We have fossil evidence of mass death events associated with volcanic eruptions, areas where numerous animals of different species all perished in a short period of time. Young dinosaurs, with their higher metabolic rates and greater sensitivity to environmental stresses, would have been particularly vulnerable during these catastrophes. Wildfires, whether started by lightning, volcanic activity, or other causes, would have been another significant threat. The Mesozoic world had abundant vegetation, and in many regions, this vegetation would have been dry for part of the year, creating conditions ripe for fires. A wildfire sweeping through a nesting area could destroy entire clutches of eggs, kill hatchlings and juveniles, and force surviving dinosaurs to flee into unfamiliar territory where new dangers awaited. Adult dinosaurs, with their long legs and ability to move quickly, might outrun a fire, but hatchlings and small juveniles would have had no chance. We can see evidence of ancient wildfires in the fossil record in the form of charcoal layers, fossilized evidence of burned vegetation that tells us fire was a regular occurrence in many Mesozoic ecosystems. Disease, too, would have played a role in shaping dinosaur populations, though this is an area where the fossil record provides frustratingly little direct evidence. Soft tissue rarely fossilizes, and most diseases leave no trace on bones, but we know from studying modern animals that disease is a major factor in population dynamics, particularly for young animals. Juvenile animals with immune systems that are still developing are often more susceptible to infections than adults. Diseases could sweep through populations of young dinosaurs, killing many and weakening others to the point where they became easy prey for predators. Some diseases would have been transmitted from parents to offspring, either through the egg itself or through physical contact after hatching. Others would have been environmental, picked up from contaminated water or food, or transmitted by biting insects. The concentration of young dinosaurs in nesting areas would have facilitated disease transmission. When many animals are crowded into a small area, as would have been the case in nesting grounds where hundreds or thousands of eggs were laid in close proximity, diseases can spread rapidly from individual to individual. A pathogen that infected one hatchling could quickly spread to all the others in the immediate area, potentially wiping out entire cohorts of young dinosaurs. Parasites, which we will examine in more detail later, would have been particularly problematic for young dinosaurs. Internal parasites like worms could infest hatchlings, consuming nutrients that the growing dinosaur needed for its rapid growth. A heavy parasite load could slow growth rates, weaken the immune system, and make a young dinosaur lethargic and less able to escape from predators. External parasites like ticks and mites could cause constant irritation, interfere with rest, and potentially transmit diseases. For a young dinosaur already facing numerous threats, the added burden of parasites could make the difference between survival and death. The cumulative effect of all these threats was that the vast majority of dinosaurs born never reached adulthood. Paleontologists have attempted to estimate survival rates for various dinosaur species based on the fossil record, looking at the relative abundance of fossils from different age groups. While these estimates are necessarily rough, given the biases inherent in the fossil record, they consistently suggest that mortality was extremely high among eggs, hatchlings, and juveniles. Some estimates suggest that for the largest dinosaur species, perhaps only 1 or 2 individuals out of every 100 eggs laid would survive to adulthood. The rest would perish at various stages, consumed by predators, claimed by disease, killed by environmental catastrophes, or simply failing to compete successfully for the resources they needed to survive. This high mortality rate among young dinosaurs was not a flaw in the dinosaur life strategy, but an integral part of it. Natural selection operates most strongly on the young, eliminating individuals that are less fit and allowing those with the best combinations of traits to survive and reproduce. The gauntlet of threats that young dinosaurs faced served as a filter, ensuring that only the strongest, quickest, most alert, and most fortunate individuals would pass their genes to the next generation. In this way, the predators, parasites, diseases, and environmental hazards that killed so many young dinosaurs were actually contributing to the evolutionary success of dinosaur lineages, constantly refining and improving the species through the harsh but effective mechanism of natural selection. For those young dinosaurs that did survive, that ran the gauntlet successfully and reached a size where they were less vulnerable, the memory of those early dangers would have been encoded in their behavior. Adult dinosaurs would have been cautious around water sources, alert to the presence of crocodilians. They would have been wary when crossing open areas, scanning for predators. Females selecting nesting sites would have chosen locations that offered some protection from the most common nest predators, perhaps avoiding areas where snake populations were particularly high or selecting sites that were easier to defend. This learned and instinctive caution, passed down through generations both genetically and through behavioral example, was part of how dinosaurs adapted to the dangerous world they inhabited. But survival to adulthood did not mean that dangers disappeared. It simply meant that the nature of the threats changed. Adult dinosaurs, while certainly much safer than juveniles, still faced risks from predators, particularly predators that specialized in hunting adults or that were large enough to pose a threat even to massive herbivores. The Mesozoic landscape included some of the largest terrestrial predators that have ever existed, theropods that reached lengths of 40 feet or more, with skulls the size of a refrigerator and teeth like steak knives. These apex predators could and did kill adult dinosaurs, using pack tactics, ambush strategies, or simply overwhelming force to bring down prey that might weigh many tons. We have evidence of these hunts preserved in the fossil record. Fossil sites have been discovered where the bones of large herbivorous dinosaurs are found in association with the teeth and bones of large theropods, suggesting predation or at least scavenging. Some herbivore fossils bear the distinctive bite marks of large theropods, evidence that they were bitten before or after death. The patterns of these bite marks, their location on the skeleton, and the evidence of healing or lack thereof can tell us whether the herbivore was killed by the theropod or whether the predator was simply scavenging an already dead carcass. In some cases, we can even identify which specific theropod species made the bite marks by comparing the spacing and shape of the tooth marks to the known dentition of different predator species. The largest herbivores, the giant sauropods that could weigh 50 tons or more, were probably safe from most predators once they reached full adult size. At that scale, there were simply no predators large enough to routinely hunt them. Even the largest theropods would have thought twice before attacking a fully grown adult sauropod in good health. The risk of injury would have been too high, and the difficulty of bringing down such a massive animal would have made the hunt impractical in most cases. But even these giants were not entirely safe. Sick adults, elderly individuals whose health was declining, or animals that had been injured in accidents or fights could become vulnerable. A theropod pack might target such individuals, recognizing that a weakened sauropod was a very different prospect from a healthy one. Smaller adult dinosaurs, those in the medium-sized ranges, faced more consistent predation pressure. Hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, ornithopods, and similar herbivores, while large enough to be dangerous to smaller predators, were definitely within the hunting range of large theropods. These herbivores evolved numerous defensive strategies to reduce their vulnerability. Some developed armor, thick plates of bone embedded in their skin that could deflect bites and slashes. Others evolved horns, spikes, and other weapons that could be used to fight back against attackers. Still others relied on speed and agility, using their ability to run quickly and change direction rapidly to evade predators. And many species adopted herd living, finding safety in numbers and benefiting from the many eyes and ears of the group for detecting approaching threats. Herd living in particular deserves our attention as a defensive strategy against predation. When animals live in groups, predators face several challenges that they do not encounter when hunting solitary prey. First, detection becomes more difficult. A predator might be able to approach a solitary animal without being noticed, but in a herd, there are many individuals that might spot the approaching threat and alert the others. Second, even if the predator successfully approaches the herd, selecting and isolating a target becomes problematic. A predator rushing into a herd might find itself surrounded by large, dangerous animals, any one of which could injure or kill it. Third, the confusion created by many animals moving simultaneously can make it difficult for a predator to maintain focus on a selected target. The predator might start pursuing one individual, but then lose track of it among the mass of similar-looking animals. We have abundant evidence that many dinosaur species lived in herds. Fossil sites containing the remains of dozens or even hundreds of individuals of the same species, often individuals of different ages suggesting family groups or age-mixed herds, have been discovered around the world. These mass death sites, often the result of catastrophes like floods that killed many animals simultaneously, provide us with snapshots of ancient social structures. They show us that herd living was common among many dinosaur groups and that these herds sometimes contain large numbers of individuals. But herd living, while offering protection against predators, also created its own challenges. A large herd of herbivorous dinosaurs would have had enormous food requirements. In some environments, particularly those with seasonal variations in plant growth, finding enough food to sustain a large herd would have been difficult. This may have forced herds to migrate, moving seasonally between different areas to follow the availability of food and water. These migrations would have been spectacular events, hundreds or thousands of large dinosaurs moving across the landscape in search of resources. But they would also have been dangerous. Migration routes would have been predictable, at least in general terms, and predators could have positioned themselves along these routes, waiting for the herds to arrive. River crossings, mountain passes, and other geographical bottlenecks would have been particularly dangerous places where predators could ambush migrating dinosaurs that had no choice but to pass through. The young and the weak would have been particularly vulnerable during migrations. A juvenile dinosaur struggling to keep up with the herd or an elderly individual whose strength was failing could easily become separated from the group. Once separated, they would have been easy targets for predators that followed the migrations specifically to pick off stragglers. We can see this same pattern in modern migrations of large herbivores, where predators like lions and crocodiles concentrate near river crossings or along migration routes, knowing that opportunities for easy kills will present themselves. Territorial boundaries represented another type of danger for adult dinosaurs. Many animals, both modern and presumably ancient, defend territories against members of their own species. These territories represent exclusive access to resources like food, water, or mates. For large dinosaurs, particularly males during breeding season, territorial disputes could be fierce and dangerous. While these conflicts were typically between members of the same species rather than between predators and prey, they were nonetheless deadly. We have fossil evidence of dinosaurs with injuries that appear to have been inflicted by members of their own species, wounds that match the weapons that those species possessed. Ceratopsians with broken or damaged horns, suggesting they had been used in combat. Pachycephalosaurs with injuries to their thickened skulls, evidence of head-butting contests. Theropods with bite marks that match the teeth of their own species, indicating intraspecific combat. Some of these territorial or dominance battles would have been relatively ritualized, with the combatants following instinctive rules that limited the likelihood of serious injury. But not all conflicts would have been so restrained. When the stakes were high enough, when the winner would gain exclusive access to a critical resource or to potential mates, fights could escalate to the point of serious injury or death. An adult dinosaur killed in such a conflict was just as dead as one killed by a predator, and the opportunity such a death created would not have been wasted. Predators and scavengers would have quickly found the carcass, attracted by the scent of blood or simply by the sight of carrion birds gathering, and would have consumed what remained. This brings us to an important aspect of Mesozoic ecology that is sometimes overlooked in popular portrayals: the role of scavenging. Not every dead dinosaur was killed by a predator. Many died of disease, injury, old age, accidents, or environmental catastrophes. These carcasses represented valuable food resources that would not have gone to waste. Scavenging was likely an important feeding strategy for many Mesozoic animals, including animals that we typically think of as predators. Even the largest theropods, fearsome hunters though they may have been, almost certainly scavenged when the opportunity arose. Why risk injury in a dangerous hunt when a free meal in the form of a carcass was available? The distinction between predators and scavengers is often overstated. Most animals that hunt also scavenge when they can, and many animals that primarily scavenge will kill small or weak prey if the opportunity presents itself. The abundance of scavengers in an ecosystem is actually a sign of healthy predator populations, because scavengers rely on predators to create carcasses. In the Mesozoic, the community of scavengers would have included not just large theropods, but also smaller dinosaurs, early mammals, crocodilians, flying pterosaurs, and various other creatures. Each would have had its niche in the hierarchy of scavenging. The largest predators would arrive first, using their size and strength to claim the best portions of the carcass. Smaller predators would wait their turn or dart in to snatch morsels when the giants were distracted. Mammals might have waited until night to approach the carcass, using the cover of darkness to avoid the attention of larger scavengers. Insects would arrive in vast numbers, consuming the soft tissues and laying their eggs in the decaying flesh. This community of scavengers performed an essential ecological function, recycling nutrients from dead organisms back into the ecosystem. Without scavengers, carcasses would decompose more slowly, tying up nutrients and potentially becoming sources of disease. The rapid consumption of carcasses by scavengers ensured that nutrients were quickly returned to the food web, sustaining the complex network of life that characterized Mesozoic ecosystems. Flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, deserve special mention in any discussion of Mesozoic ecology and the threats facing dinosaurs. These remarkable creatures, which were not dinosaurs but a distinct lineage of reptiles that evolved powered flight independently, filled ecological roles similar to modern birds. Pterosaurs ranged in size from sparrow-sized animals to the largest flying creatures that have ever existed, with wingspans exceeding 30 feet. The smaller pterosaurs likely fed primarily on insects, fish, and other small prey, while the giants may have been scavengers, using their ability to soar vast distances to locate carcasses or predators of small to medium-sized land animals. For young dinosaurs, pterosaurs would have represented a threat from a direction that would have been difficult to defend against. A pterosaur swooping down from the sky could snatch a hatchling or small juvenile before the young dinosaur even knew it was in danger. The attack would be over in seconds, the pterosaur using its momentum to carry its prey into the air where it could be consumed at leisure or carried back to a nest to feed to young pterosaurs. This threat from above would have made open areas particularly dangerous for young dinosaurs, which would have needed to remain under cover as much as possible. Dense vegetation, overhanging rocks, or the protective presence of adult herd members would have been essential for safety. We should also consider the role of disease transmission among dinosaurs and between dinosaurs and other species. In modern ecosystems, diseases can pass between species, particularly between closely related species. Dinosaurs living in communities with other reptiles, early mammals, and various other creatures would have been exposed to pathogens from multiple sources. Some of these pathogens would have been specialists, affecting only specific dinosaur species or groups. Others would have been generalists, capable of infecting multiple host species. The movement of dinosaurs across landscapes, particularly during migrations, would have facilitated the spread of diseases, carrying pathogens from one region to another. Waterborne diseases would have been particularly significant. Water sources, as we have discussed, were concentration points for life, places where many different species would come to drink. A pathogen introduced into a water source could infect numerous individuals of multiple species. Dinosaurs drinking from contaminated water could ingest parasites, bacteria, or other disease organisms that would then multiply inside their bodies. Some of these infections would have been acute, killing the host quickly. Others would have been chronic, causing long-term health problems that weakened the animal and made it more vulnerable to predation. The fossil record occasionally provides us with direct evidence of disease in dinosaurs. Bones can show signs of infection, tumors, arthritis, and other health problems. While soft tissue diseases leave no trace, skeletal evidence can tell us that dinosaurs suffered from many of the same types of ailments that affect modern animals. A dinosaur with a severe bone infection would have been in constant pain, its mobility limited, its ability to feed and defend itself compromised. Such an individual would have been an ideal target for predators, which are adept at identifying weak or sick prey. The old, the sick, and the injured are always the first to be taken by predators, a harsh reality that serves the function of keeping prey populations healthy by removing individuals that are unlikely to survive in any case. We must also consider the chemical and physical challenges of the Mesozoic environment itself. Atmospheric composition was different during much of the Mesozoic than it is today. Oxygen levels fluctuated, being higher than modern levels during some periods and lower during others. Carbon dioxide levels were generally higher than they are today, contributing to a greenhouse effect that kept global temperatures warm and prevented the formation of polar ice caps for much of the era. These atmospheric differences would have affected dinosaur physiology in ways that are not fully understood, but certainly would have influenced things like metabolic rates, growth rates, and susceptibility to environmental stresses. Temperature regulation would have been a significant challenge for many dinosaurs. While there is ongoing debate about whether dinosaurs were endothermic like modern mammals and birds, ectothermic like modern reptiles, or something in between, it is clear that temperature would have been a critical factor in their biology. Young dinosaurs, with their high surface area to volume ratios, would have been particularly vulnerable to temperature fluctuations. A hatchling could quickly overheat in direct sunlight or become dangerously cold on a cool night. This would have placed constraints on when and where young dinosaurs could be active and would have made them vulnerable to predation during times when they needed to bask in the sun to warm up or seek shade to cool down. The Mesozoic landscape itself was more dynamic than many popular portrayals suggest. Continental drift was actively reshaping the world's geography. The supercontinent of Pangaea, which had existed at the beginning of the Mesozoic, broke apart during the Triassic and Jurassic periods, with the fragments drifting apart to form the continents we know today. This process of continental breakup created new ocean basins, raised mountain ranges, and altered climate patterns in profound ways. Sea levels fluctuated dramatically throughout the Mesozoic, rising and falling in response to changes in ocean basin volumes and the thermal expansion and contraction of seawater. These sea level changes periodically flooded low-lying areas of continents, creating vast shallow seas that subdivided landmasses and altered the distribution of terrestrial ecosystems. For dinosaurs and other terrestrial organisms, these geological and geographical changes created both challenges and opportunities. Rising sea levels could fragment populations, isolating groups of dinosaurs on islands or in reduced land areas. This isolation could lead to speciation as isolated populations evolved in different directions, but it could also lead to local extinctions if populations became too small to be viable. Falling sea levels could create land bridges between previously separated areas, allowing dinosaurs to migrate into new regions and bringing together species that had evolved in isolation. These mixing events could lead to increased competition and predation as species that had not previously interacted suddenly found themselves sharing the same ecosystems. Volcanic activity, as we have mentioned, was common during the Mesozoic, particularly in certain regions and during certain periods. Large igneous provinces, vast areas of volcanic rock formed by repeated eruptions over extended periods, were created during several episodes in the Mesozoic. These eruptions would have had catastrophic local effects, burying everything in their path under lava and ash, but they would also have had global effects, injecting vast quantities of gases and particulates into the atmosphere, altering climate patterns, and potentially causing mass extinctions. End Triassic and End Cretaceous mass extinctions, two of the most severe extinction events in Earth's history, both coincide with the formation of large igneous provinces, suggesting that volcanism may have played a role in triggering these ecological catastrophes. Between these mass extinction events, life in the Mesozoic experienced its own rhythms and cycles. Seasons, though perhaps less extreme than in modern temperate regions due to the generally warmer global climate, still would have existed. Many regions would have experienced wet and dry seasons, which would have profoundly affected the distribution and behavior of dinosaurs. During wet seasons, vegetation would have been lush and food would have been abundant, allowing herbivorous dinosaurs to feed extensively and build up fat reserves. Reproduction would have been timed to coincide with these periods of abundance, ensuring that young would hatch or be born when food was plentiful. During dry seasons, conditions would have been much harsher. Water sources would have contracted or dried up entirely, vegetation would have withered, and food would have become scarce. Dinosaurs would have needed to travel farther to find food and water, increasing their exposure to predators and the risk of encounters with competitors. These seasonal cycles would have created pulses of vulnerability for dinosaurs. The breeding season, when adults were distracted by the demands of reproduction, would have been a time when predators could more easily kill adults. The nesting season, when eggs were laid and parents were focused on guarding nests, created opportunities for both egg predators and for predators targeting distracted adults. The hatching season brought a sudden abundance of vulnerable young dinosaurs into the world, creating a seasonal feast for predators. And the dry season, when weakened, starving dinosaurs struggled to find enough resources to survive, would have been another period when predation rates spiked. Understanding these cycles and patterns helps us appreciate the complexity of Mesozoic ecosystems. These were not static worlds where relationships between species remained constant. They were dynamic, ever-changing environments where the balance of power shifted with the seasons, where the dangers facing any individual animal varied depending on where it was, what time of year it was, and what stage of life it had reached. A dinosaur that successfully navigated all these challenges, that survived the egg stage, the vulnerable hatchling period, the dangerous juvenile years, and reached adulthood, had accomplished something remarkable. It had proven itself fit, capable of reading the environment, avoiding dangers, finding food, and competing successfully against its peers. And yet, even having accomplished all this, its story was not over. It would need to continue to survive, to navigate new challenges, and eventually to reproduce, passing its genes to the next generation and beginning the cycle anew. The story we have told so far is primarily a story of direct threats, of predators actively hunting dinosaurs, of environmental hazards killing them outright. But there is another layer to the dangers that shaped dinosaur lives, a layer that is in some ways more insidious because it was less obvious. These are the threats that did not kill quickly but instead drained energy, reduced fitness, and made dinosaurs more vulnerable to other dangers. Chief among these hidden threats were parasites, organisms that lived on or in dinosaurs, feeding on their tissues, their blood, or the nutrients they consumed, and in the process weakening their hosts. The evidence for parasites in the Mesozoic comes primarily from a remarkable source: amber. Amber is fossilized tree resin, and when insects or other small organisms become trapped in sticky resin, they can be preserved in exquisite detail, their bodies protected from decay and fossilization processes that would normally destroy such delicate structures. Amber deposits from the Mesozoic have yielded an extraordinary array of preserved organisms, including numerous parasites that would have fed on dinosaurs. These tiny creatures, many of them barely visible to the naked eye, tell a story of constant irritation and energy drain that would have been a background reality for feathered and scaled dinosaurs alike. Ticks, for example, have been found preserved in Mesozoic amber, their bodies engorged with blood that they consumed before becoming trapped in the resin. These ticks are the ancestors of modern ticks, which are among the most successful and persistent parasites of vertebrates today. Ticks are blood-feeding arthropods that attach to their hosts, pierce the skin with specialized mouthparts, and feed for extended periods, sometimes days. A single tick might consume an amount of blood many times its own body weight. For a large animal, the blood loss from a few ticks is negligible, but ticks are rarely found in small numbers. A heavily infested animal might host hundreds or even thousands of ticks, particularly during the peak of tick season when newly hatched larvae and nymphs are searching for hosts. The cumulative blood loss from such an infestation would have been significant, potentially causing anemia and weakness. But the direct blood loss is only part of the problem that ticks create. Tick bites are irritating, causing itching and discomfort that can distract an animal and interfere with rest. More seriously, ticks are vectors for numerous diseases. Modern ticks transmit bacteria, viruses, and protozoan parasites that cause diseases like Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and numerous other ailments in their hosts. We have every reason to believe that Mesozoic ticks similarly transmitted diseases, though the specific pathogens would have been different. A tick feeding on one dinosaur could pick up a pathogen from that host's blood and then transmit it to the next dinosaur it fed on, effectively serving as a flying hypodermic needle carrying diseases from animal to animal. The discovery of Mesozoic ticks in amber, particularly ticks associated with feathers or preserved near other evidence of dinosaurs, tells us that feathered dinosaurs in particular would have struggled with these parasites. Feathers provide an ideal habitat for ticks, offering protection from the elements and making it difficult for the host to groom them away. A feathered dinosaur, much like a modern bird, would have needed to spend significant time preening, using its beak to search through its feathers for parasites and remove them. This grooming behavior, while necessary, takes time and energy away from other activities like feeding, reproducing, or watching for predators. Other types of parasitic insects have also been found in Mesozoic amber. Louse-like insects that would have lived permanently in the feathers of dinosaurs, feeding on dead skin, feather fragments, and in some cases blood. These parasites, while individually tiny, could exist in enormous numbers on a single host. A heavily parasitized dinosaur might host thousands of these insects, each one consuming small amounts of resources, but collectively representing a significant drain. The constant irritation of thousands of tiny parasites crawling through feathers, biting skin, and triggering itching sensations would have been a form of torture, interfering with sleep and rest. Feather-feeding insects specifically adapted to consume feathers themselves have been identified in Mesozoic amber. These remarkable creatures possess specialized mouthparts for chewing through the tough keratin that feathers are made of. A dinosaur's feathers served multiple functions: insulation, display, waterproofing, and in the case of flying or gliding species, enabling flight. Feathers damaged by parasites would have been less effective at performing these functions. Damaged insulating feathers would have reduced the dinosaur's ability to regulate its body temperature, forcing it to expend more energy maintaining appropriate body temperature. Damaged display feathers would have made the dinosaur less attractive to potential mates, reducing its reproductive success. Damaged flight feathers would have compromised flying ability, potentially with fatal consequences. The investment required to grow and maintain feathers was substantial. Feathers are complex structures, and growing them requires significant amounts of protein and energy. A dinosaur with heavy parasite loads would have faced a cruel dilemma: invest energy in growing new feathers to replace those damaged by parasites, or conserve energy for other essential functions like growth, reproduction, or simply staying alive. For a young dinosaur in particular, this dilemma would have been acute. The energy consumed by parasites was energy not available for growth, and slower growth meant prolonged vulnerability to predators. Internal parasites would have posed even greater threats in some ways than external parasites. While we have less direct evidence of internal parasites in dinosaurs, it is biologically inconceivable that they did not exist. Every modern vertebrate species hosts internal parasites, often multiple species of them, and there is no reason to think dinosaurs were any different. Intestinal worms, parasitic protozoans, and other internal parasites would have lived in the digestive systems of dinosaurs, consuming nutrients that the host had ingested and in some cases damaging the intestinal lining, reducing the host's ability to absorb nutrients even from food that the parasites did not directly consume. A dinosaur with a heavy burden of intestinal parasites would have been in a constant state of nutritional stress. No matter how much it ate, a significant portion of the nutrients would have been stolen by the parasites. The dinosaur would have needed to eat more just to maintain its body condition, and if food was scarce, it would have been unable to meet both its own needs and those of its parasites. The result would have been progressive weakening, weight loss, lethargy, and increased vulnerability to disease and predation. Young dinosaurs would have been particularly susceptible to heavy parasite burdens because their immune systems were still developing and because they had higher nutritional requirements for growth. The transmission of internal parasites would have occurred through multiple routes. Parasites that produced eggs or cysts that were expelled in the host's feces could contaminate food or water sources, which would then be consumed by other dinosaurs, continuing the cycle. Some parasites used intermediate hosts, infecting one species before being transmitted to another species that consumed the intermediate host. For example, a parasite might have had a life cycle that involved infecting small prey animals, which were then eaten by carnivorous dinosaurs, allowing the parasite to infect the predator. This type of complex life cycle is common among modern parasites and almost certainly existed among Mesozoic parasites as well. The ecological implications of parasitism in Mesozoic ecosystems are profound. Parasites affect host populations in multiple ways beyond simply killing individual hosts. By weakening hosts, parasites make them more vulnerable to predation, effectively serving as allies of predators. By reducing the reproductive success of hosts, parasites can limit population growth. By consuming resources that would otherwise support host populations, parasites reduce the carrying capacity of the environment. And by exerting selective pressure on hosts to evolve defenses against parasitism, parasites drive evolutionary change in host species. Dinosaurs would have evolved various defenses against parasites, just as modern animals have. Grooming behaviors, which we have already mentioned, would have been a primary defense against external parasites. Social grooming, where individuals help each other remove parasites from areas they cannot reach themselves, may have occurred among some dinosaur species, as it does among many modern birds and mammals. Some dinosaurs may have engaged in dust bathing or mud wallowing behaviors to help control external parasites. Birds today use dust baths to help control feather parasites, and we might imagine similar behaviors among feathered dinosaurs. Mud or dust coating the skin and feathers could have suffocated parasites or made it more difficult for them to attach to the host. Some plants produce chemicals that repel or kill parasites, and dinosaurs may have sought out these plants specifically for their antiparasitic properties. We see this behavior in modern animals, a phenomenon known as zoopharmacognosy, where animals appear to self-medicate by consuming plants with medicinal properties. A dinosaur suffering from heavy parasite loads might have instinctively sought out plants containing compounds that would kill or expel internal parasites or repel external ones. The evolution of such behaviors would have represented an arms race between parasites and hosts, with parasites evolving resistance to antiparasitic compounds and hosts needing to find new sources of such compounds. The immune system itself represents the body's primary defense against parasites and pathogens. While we cannot directly study dinosaur immune systems, we can infer from modern vertebrates that dinosaurs would have had sophisticated immune responses. The immune system's job is to distinguish between the body's own cells and foreign organisms, and to attack and destroy the foreign organisms. An effective immune system could control parasite populations within the host, preventing them from multiplying to levels that would seriously harm or kill the host. But maintaining an immune system is energetically expensive. The cells and chemicals involved in immune responses must be constantly produced, and mounting an immune response to an infection requires significant energy investment. This creates another trade-off that dinosaurs would have had to navigate. Energy invested in immune function is energy not available for other purposes like growth, reproduction, or activity. A young dinosaur with limited energy resources would have faced difficult trade-offs between fighting off parasites and infections and growing rapidly enough to escape the size classes most vulnerable to predation. These trade-offs would have varied depending on environmental conditions, food availability, parasite loads, and individual genetic differences in immune system effectiveness. The question of dinosaur physiology is relevant here. If dinosaurs were endothermic, maintaining high body temperatures like modern mammals and birds, this would have given them an advantage in fighting infections and controlling parasites because many biochemical processes, including immune responses, proceed more efficiently at higher temperatures. But endothermy is energetically expensive, requiring dinosaurs to consume much more food than they would have needed if they were ectothermic. If dinosaurs were ectothermic, relying on external heat sources to regulate body temperature like modern reptiles, they would have had lower energy requirements but potentially less effective immune responses and slower recovery from injuries and illnesses. The current scientific consensus leans toward at least some dinosaurs, particularly theropods and likely the ancestors of birds, being endothermic or having metabolic rates intermediate between ectothermy and endothermy. Evidence for this comes from multiple sources. Growth rates inferred from bone histology that suggest rapid growth consistent with endothermy, the presence of feathers in many theropods which would have been most useful for insulation in an endothermic animal, and the evolution of birds which are definitively endothermic and represent a lineage of theropod dinosaurs. For other dinosaur groups, particularly some of the very largest sauropods, the evidence is less clear, and there is ongoing debate about whether these animals were true endotherms or used alternative strategies like gigantothermy, where their enormous body size allowed them to maintain relatively stable body temperatures simply due to their low surface area to volume ratios. Regardless of the details of their thermoregulation, all dinosaurs would have been affected by parasites, and the energy drain imposed by parasitism would have been a constant background pressure shaping their lives. For every dinosaur that died in the jaws of a predator, others died more slowly from the cumulative effects of parasitism, disease, and malnutrition. These deaths are less dramatic than predation and leave less obvious traces in the fossil record, but they were no less real and probably accounted for a substantial proportion of mortality, particularly among juveniles. We should also consider the social and behavioral dimensions of how dinosaurs might have coped with the dangers they faced. Social behaviors that we observe in modern animals facing predation pressure would likely have had analogs in dinosaur societies. Alarm calls or displays to warn other group members of approaching predators, coordinated defensive behaviors where multiple individuals work together to drive away threats, teaching of young by adults about what is dangerous and how to avoid it. All of these behaviors are seen in modern birds and mammals and could plausibly have existed among dinosaurs as well. The evolution of sophisticated social behaviors requires certain cognitive capabilities. The ability to recognize individuals, to remember past interactions, to coordinate actions with others, to learn from experience and teach others. Evidence suggests that at least some dinosaurs possessed these capabilities. Brain structure inferred from skull cavities suggests that some theropods had relatively large brains with enlarged regions associated with sensory processing and motor control. Trackways showing multiple individuals of the same species moving together in coordinated fashion suggest group living and possibly coordinated movement. And fossil evidence of adults found with juveniles, sometimes with evidence of feeding or caring for the young, suggests parental care and social learning. The ability to learn which situations are dangerous and how to respond appropriately would have been a crucial survival skill for dinosaurs. A young hadrosaur that observed adults reacting with alarm to the sight of a large theropod on the horizon would learn to associate that sight with danger and to flee when it appeared. A juvenile sauropod that watched its parents approach water sources cautiously, scanning for crocodilians before drinking, would learn to exercise similar caution. This social learning, the transmission of survival information from one generation to the next through observation and teaching rather than solely through genetic programming, would have allowed dinosaurs to adapt more quickly to changing conditions and novel threats than if they had to rely solely on instinct. But social behaviors, while offering many advantages, also created new vulnerabilities. A highly social dinosaur that became separated from its group would have lost the protection that group living provided and would have been at much higher risk of predation. Disease transmission would have been facilitated by close social contact, with contagious diseases spreading more easily through a group than among solitary individuals. And social conflicts, competition for status within the group or for access to mates, could lead to injuries that weakened individuals and made them more vulnerable to predation. The picture that emerges from all this evidence and inference is of a Mesozoic world far more complex and dangerous than simple narratives of dinosaur dominance would suggest. Dinosaurs were successful, certainly, dominating terrestrial ecosystems for more than 150 million years and achieving extraordinary diversity in body plans, sizes, and ecological roles. But their success was not due to any guarantee of safety or freedom from threats. Instead, it was the result of evolutionary adaptations that allowed them to navigate a world filled with dangers, to survive despite constant predation pressure, parasitism, disease, and environmental challenges. Every dinosaur that lived to adulthood and successfully reproduced had won a lottery of sorts, had proven itself capable of surviving a gauntlet of threats that killed the vast majority of its cohort. And even having won that lottery once, it would need to continue winning it every day, navigating a landscape of risk where death could come from above in the form of a swooping pterosaur, from below in the form of a lurking crocodilian, from the side in the form of an ambushing theropod, or from within in the form of parasites and disease. There was no safe haven, no place where a dinosaur could let its guard down entirely. Vigilance, caution, and constant awareness of one's surroundings were essential for survival. This concludes part 1 of our exploration of the hidden dangers of the dinosaur world. We have examined the threats that shaped dinosaur lives from the egg to adulthood, looked at the predators that specialized in hunting young and vulnerable dinosaurs, explored the role of environmental hazards and the dangers posed by water and shorelines, and considered the insidious threats posed by parasites. In Part 2, we will delve deeper into specific types of predators and threats, examine the evidence for predation in more detail, explore the marine realm and its intersection with the terrestrial world of dinosaurs, and ultimately arrive at a comprehensive understanding of the age of dinosaurs as a time not of simple dominance, but of complex, dangerous, interconnected ecosystems where every creature, regardless of size, faced constant challenges to survival. The journey continues, taking us deeper into the Mesozoic and revealing more of the intricate web of life and death that characterized this remarkable era in Earth's history. We return now to our journey through the dangerous world of the Mesozoic, continuing our exploration of the threats that shaped dinosaur lives and challenged the notion of simple reptilian dominance. In the first part of our investigation, we examined the vulnerability of young dinosaurs, the constant pressure of nest raiders, the drain imposed by parasites, and the fundamental reality that size alone did not guarantee safety in a world filled with overlapping dangers. Now we turn our attention to specific predators and predatory strategies, to the evidence that reveals the details of ancient hunts, and to the boundaries between ecosystems where different types of danger converged. The mammals of the Mesozoic deserve far more attention than they have traditionally received in popular narratives about the age of dinosaurs. For decades, the standard story portrayed Mesozoic mammals as insignificant creatures, small and shrew-like, cowering in the shadows and waiting for the dinosaurs to go extinct before they could finally claim their place in the sun. This narrative was always more myth than reality, but it has only been in recent decades, as new fossil discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of Mesozoic mammals, that the full extent of its inaccuracy has become apparent. The mammals that lived alongside dinosaurs were far more diverse, far more capable, and far more significant as ecological actors than anyone had previously imagined. The discovery that fundamentally changed our understanding of mammal-dinosaur interactions was made in China, in the fossil-rich deposits of the Yixian Formation. This formation, dating to the early Cretaceous period approximately 125 million years ago, has yielded an extraordinary array of fossils, including feathered dinosaurs, early birds, pterosaurs, and numerous mammals. The preservation in these deposits is exceptional, often including soft tissue details and even stomach contents. It was in these deposits that paleontologists discovered a fossil that sent shock waves through the scientific community and forced a complete reassessment of Mesozoic ecology. The fossil in question belongs to a mammal called Repenomamus robustus, and it is remarkable for several reasons. First, the animal itself was large for a Mesozoic mammal, measuring approximately 3 feet in length and weighing perhaps 30 pounds or more. This made it one of the largest mammals of its time, substantially bigger than the mouse or shrew-sized creatures that were supposed to represent the typical Mesozoic mammal. Second, and more dramatically, preserved within the ribcage of this Repenomamus specimen, in the area where its stomach would have been, were the bones of a young dinosaur. The dinosaur was identified as a juvenile Psittacosaurus, a small ceratopsian dinosaur that as an adult would have been roughly the size of a large dog, but in its juvenile form was much smaller, perhaps the size of a chicken. The implications of this discovery are profound. This was not a case of a mammal scavenging an already dead dinosaur, convenient though such an interpretation might have been for preserving the traditional narrative. The dinosaur bones were articulated, still in their proper anatomical positions relative to each other, and they were located precisely where we would expect to find a last meal in the digestive system of the mammal. The only reasonable interpretation is that this Repenomamus had killed and consumed this young Psittacosaurus shortly before its own death. A mammal had actively hunted, killed, and eaten a dinosaur. This single fossil demolished the idea that mammals were invariably the victims in any interaction with dinosaurs, that they were too small and too insignificant to pose any threat to the dominant reptiles. Clearly, at least some Mesozoic mammals were perfectly capable of killing and eating young dinosaurs. The question then became, how widespread was this behavior? Was Repenomamus an exception, an unusually large and capable mammal in a world where most of its relatives were indeed small and timid? Or was it representative of a broader pattern that we had simply failed to recognize because the fossil record is so incomplete? Further discoveries have suggested that the latter interpretation is closer to the truth. Other large Mesozoic mammals have been discovered, some approaching or even exceeding the size of Repenomamus. These mammals show a variety of dietary adaptations. Some were insectivores, with teeth specialized for catching and consuming insects. Others were herbivores, with teeth adapted for grinding plant material. And others, like Repenomamus, appear to have been carnivores or omnivores, with teeth suitable for processing meat. The diversity of Mesozoic mammals, it turns out, was far greater than anyone had suspected, and this diversity included ecological roles that brought them into direct conflict with dinosaurs. Repenomamus itself appears to have been an active predator rather than simply a scavenger. Its robust build, powerful jaws, and sharp teeth were tools for killing. Its limbs suggest it was probably not a fast runner, but was certainly capable of moving quickly over short distances. The picture that emerges is of an ambush predator, an animal that would have hidden in dense vegetation or rocky cover, waiting for suitable prey to pass within striking distance. When a young dinosaur wandered too close, the Repenomamus would have launched its attack, using surprise and the power of its initial rush to overwhelm prey before it could escape. The size of prey that Repenomamus could have taken would have been limited by its own size and strength. The juvenile Psittacosaurus found in the stomach of the fossilized specimen was relatively small, perhaps weighing only a pound or two. This was probably near the upper limit of what a Repenomamus could reliably kill and consume. Larger juvenile dinosaurs would have been too strong and too dangerous to attack, but the abundance of small juvenile dinosaurs in Mesozoic ecosystems would have provided Repenomamus and similar mammals with ample hunting opportunities. Every dinosaur species began life small, and during the vulnerable period between hatching and growing large enough to be safe from mammalian predators, they would have been potential prey. The predation pressure that mammals exerted on young dinosaurs would have been particularly intense at night. Mammals, as we have discussed, were primarily nocturnal during the Mesozoic, an adaptation that allowed them to avoid competition and conflict with the diurnal dinosaurs. But this nocturnal lifestyle also gave them exclusive access to the nighttime landscape, a world where young dinosaurs would have been vulnerable. A juvenile dinosaur settled down for the night, possibly huddled with siblings for warmth and protection, would have been detectable to a mammal through scent and sound. The mammal could have approached in darkness, using its excellent night vision and other senses to navigate, and attacked before the young dinosaurs could react effectively. This raises interesting questions about the evolution of parental care in dinosaurs. One major advantage of parental care, of adults remaining with their young for extended periods, is protection from predators. An adult dinosaur, even a relatively small one, would have been more than capable of driving away a mammalian predator like Repenomamus. The presence of a parent would have made the difference between safety and vulnerability for young dinosaurs. We might therefore expect that species which faced particularly intense predation pressure on their young would have been more likely to evolve extended parental care, while species whose young faced lower predation pressure might have been able to adopt the strategy of simply laying many eggs and leaving them unguarded. The fossil record provides some support for this idea. Dinosaur species for which we have evidence of parental care tend to be those that lived in environments with diverse predator communities, where young dinosaurs would have faced threats from multiple sources. Conversely, some of the largest dinosaurs, particularly giant sauropods that lived in environments with fewer predators capable of threatening even their smallest juveniles, show less clear evidence of extended parental care. This pattern makes evolutionary sense. Parental care is costly, requiring adults to invest time and energy in protecting and possibly feeding their young rather than in their own growth and reproduction. Natural selection would favor parental care when the benefits, increased offspring survival, outweighed the costs. But we must be careful not to oversimplify the relationship between mammals and dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. It was not a simple story of mammals hunting dinosaurs or dinosaurs hunting mammals. The reality was far more complex, with interactions varying depending on the species involved, the environment, the time of day, and the sizes of the individuals. Small mammals would have been prey for small carnivorous dinosaurs. Young dinosaurs would have been prey for larger mammals, and both groups would have competed for resources like insects, fruits, and other food sources that were available to both. Competition between mammals and dinosaurs has received less attention than predation, but was probably equally important in shaping both groups. When two species compete for the same limited resources, natural selection favors individuals that are more efficient at obtaining those resources or that can utilize alternative resources that the competitor cannot access. The coexistence of mammals and dinosaurs for more than 150 million years suggests that both groups found ways to partition resources, to divide up the available food and habitat in ways that reduced direct competition. The nocturnal lifestyle of most Mesozoic mammals was probably part of this partitioning, allowing mammals to hunt insects and other small prey at night while dinosaurs hunted during the day. Another large Mesozoic mammal worthy of our attention is Repenomamus giganticus, a close relative of Repenomamus robustus but even larger, possibly reaching 4 feet in length. While we do not have direct evidence of this species consuming dinosaurs in the form of preserved stomach contents, its size and dentition suggest it was certainly capable of doing so. The existence of multiple species of large, carnivorous mammals in the early Cretaceous of Asia tells us that mammalian predation on dinosaurs was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of the normal ecology of at least some Mesozoic ecosystems. We should also consider the cumulative impact of mammalian predation across entire ecosystems and over evolutionary time. Even if individual mammals killed only a small number of young dinosaurs during their lifetimes, the aggregate effect of entire populations of mammalian predators could have been substantial. If a given nesting ground for a dinosaur species was home to dozens or hundreds of mammalian predators of various species, and each of these predators took even a few dinosaur eggs or hatchlings per year, the total mortality inflicted by mammals could have been severe. This predation pressure would have favored dinosaurs that evolved better defenses for their nests and young, creating an evolutionary arms race between predators and prey. The arms race between nest predators and nesting dinosaurs may have driven some of the diversity we see in dinosaur nesting strategies. Some dinosaurs buried their eggs deeply, making them harder for predators to find and access. Others laid their eggs in hard-to-reach locations like cliff faces or islands surrounded by water. Some built elaborate nests with raised rims that might have made it more difficult for small predators to access the eggs, and some, as we have discussed, provided parental care, with adults guarding the nests against intruders. Each of these strategies represented an evolutionary response to predation pressure, an attempt to tip the balance in favor of offspring survival. But predators, too, were evolving, developing counter-strategies to overcome dinosaur defenses. A predator that specialized in raiding dinosaur nests would have been under strong selective pressure to improve its ability to find nests, access buried or protected eggs, and avoid or overcome parental guards. The result was a constant evolutionary dance, with neither side ever gaining a permanent advantage, but both continuously adapting to the other's innovations. This brings us to a broader consideration of the role of predation in shaping dinosaur evolution. Predation is one of the most powerful forces in natural selection. Individuals that are slightly better at avoiding predators, faster, more alert, better camouflaged, more careful, are more likely to survive and reproduce than individuals that lack these traits. Over generations, this selective pressure can drive dramatic evolutionary changes. Many of the features we associate with dinosaurs may have evolved primarily as anti-predator adaptations. The armor of ankylosaurs, the horns of ceratopsians, the tail clubs of some species, the elaborate crests of hadrosaurs that may have been used to produce warning calls, all of these features likely played roles in defense against predators. Speed and agility, too, would have been crucial anti-predator adaptations for many dinosaurs. The ornithopods, a diverse group of herbivorous dinosaurs that included hadrosaurs and many smaller species, were characterized by their ability to move quickly on their hind legs. This bipedal locomotion allowed for greater speed than quadrupedal movement in animals of similar size, and this speed was almost certainly an adaptation for escaping from predators. When a predator was detected, an ornithopod could rear up onto its hind legs and sprint away, often reaching speeds that would have exceeded those of many predators. But predators, of course, were also evolving, and the same selective pressures that drove prey to become faster and more alert drove predators to become faster, more efficient hunters. The theropod dinosaurs, the group that included all the carnivorous dinosaurs and from which birds eventually evolved, showed remarkable diversity in body plans and hunting strategies. Some were large, powerful animals built for overpowering prey through brute force. Others were smaller, faster, and more agile, adapted for chasing down quick prey. Still others were specialized for particular hunting strategies or particular types of prey. Among the most fearsome predators of the Mesozoic were the large tyrannosaurs, particularly Tyrannosaurus rex, which lived at the very end of the Cretaceous period. Tyrannosaurus has become the iconic dinosaur predator, and for good reason. It was enormous, reaching lengths of 40 feet and weights of several tons. Its skull alone was over 4 feet long, filled with teeth that could measure over a foot in length, including the root. These teeth were not the thin, blade-like structures we see in some predators, but were thick, robust structures designed to crush bone. Bite force estimates for Tyrannosaurus suggest it could have exerted forces of several tons, enough to shatter the bones of even the largest prey. But Tyrannosaurus was not simply a scaled-up version of smaller predators. It had unique adaptations that tell us about its hunting strategy and ecology. The tiny forelimbs, often the subject of jokes, were actually quite muscular and were probably used for grasping prey or helping the animal rise from a prone position. The massive hind limbs and the structure of the pelvis and tail suggest that Tyrannosaurus was capable of moving quickly, possibly reaching speeds of 20 miles per hour or more in short bursts. The eyes faced partially forward, providing some degree of binocular vision that would have aided in judging distances to prey. And the brain, while small by mammalian standards, was relatively large for a reptile and included enlarged regions associated with sensory processing, particularly smell and vision. The question of whether Tyrannosaurus and other large theropods were primarily predators or primarily scavengers has been debated extensively. The current consensus is that they were opportunistic, both hunting and scavenging as circumstances dictated. Hunting is risky and energetically expensive, but it provides access to fresh kills. Scavenging is safer and requires less energy expenditure but means relying on other predators to make kills or on animals dying of other causes. An intelligent predator would do both, hunting when opportunities presented themselves and scavenging when carcasses were available. Evidence for active predation by large theropods includes healed bite marks on prey species, proof that some animals were bitten and survived, which would only make sense if they were attacked by predators while still alive. Dead animals do not heal from wounds, so healed bite marks are unambiguous evidence of attacks on living prey. We have numerous examples of hadrosaur, ceratopsian, and even other theropod fossils bearing healed bite marks that match the dentition of large tyrannosaurs. In some cases, these injuries were severe, with partially healed broken bones or deep bite marks that must have caused significant tissue damage. The fact that these animals survived long enough for healing to begin tells us something important. Not all predator attacks were successful. Prey sometimes escaped, sometimes fought back effectively, and sometimes simply got lucky. The fossil record also contains examples of predator and prey dying together, preserved in positions that strongly suggest an active hunt was in progress. While these fossils are rare, each one provides invaluable information about predator-prey interactions. One famous example, though from a smaller theropod rather than a tyrannosaur, shows a velociraptor locked in combat with a protoceratops. The two skeletons are intertwined, with the velociraptor's distinctive sickle claw embedded in the protoceratops's throat area, while the protoceratops appears to have the velociraptor's arm in its beak. Both animals appear to have died during their battle, possibly buried suddenly by a collapsing sand dune or similar catastrophe. This fossil provides direct evidence that at least some predators did indeed attack and fight with living prey, and that these encounters could be dangerous for both parties. The famous sickle claw of dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor deserves special attention as a predatory adaptation. This enlarged claw on the second toe of each foot could be held up off the ground during walking, keeping it sharp and protected. During an attack, the claw would have been deployed, possibly used to pin down prey while the predator used its teeth and hand claws to kill and dismember its victim. The exact use of this claw has been debated, with various researchers suggesting it was used to slash open prey, to climb onto large prey, or simply to pin small prey to the ground. Regardless of the specifics, it was clearly a weapon, an evolutionary adaptation for killing. But while the large and dramatic predators like Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor capture our imagination and dominate popular culture, we must remember that they were not the only threats that dinosaurs faced. In fact, for many dinosaurs, particularly smaller species or juveniles of larger species, the most dangerous predators would have been other, smaller theropods that were more numerous and more likely to be encountered in daily life. Just as a modern zebra is more likely to be killed by a hyena or wild dog than by a lion, a hadrosaur might have been more likely to fall victim to a pack of smaller predators than to a lone tyrannosaur. Pack hunting is a strategy that allows smaller predators to kill prey much larger than they could handle individually. While evidence for pack hunting in dinosaurs is controversial, there are some suggestive finds. Fossil sites containing multiple individuals of carnivorous dinosaur species, particularly when these individuals are of different ages, suggesting a family group rather than simply a mass death of animals that happen to be in the same area, may indicate social behavior that could have included cooperative hunting. Trackways showing multiple theropods moving in the same direction at the same speed might indicate coordinated movement, possibly a hunting pack pursuing prey. The dromaeosaurs, the group that includes Velociraptor and Deinonychus, are often suggested as potential pack hunters. These were medium-sized predators, typically 6 to 10 feet in length, with the intelligence, speed, and weaponry to be formidable hunters. A pack of dromaeosaurs working together could have surrounded prey, cut off escape routes, and attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, overwhelming defenses that would have been effective against a single predator. For a hadrosaur or ceratopsian, an attack by a pack of dromaeosaurs would have been terrifying, with threats coming from every direction and no safe avenue of escape. But pack hunting, while effective, also requires sophisticated cognitive abilities and social structures. Predators must be able to coordinate their actions, communicate with each other during the hunt, and presumably share the kill afterward in ways that minimize conflict among pack members. Whether dinosaurs possessed the necessary cognitive abilities for true cooperative hunting remains uncertain. Modern pack hunters like wolves and lions have relatively large brains and complex social structures. While some theropods had relatively large brains for reptiles, they still fell far short of mammalian brain sizes relative to body size. This does not necessarily mean they could not engage in pack hunting, but it does suggest that their hunting strategies might have been simpler and less flexible than those of modern mammalian pack hunters. An alternative to true cooperative hunting is mob hunting, where multiple predators are attracted to the same prey and attack simultaneously or in sequence, but without real coordination or cooperation. This behavior is seen in some modern predators, including crocodiles and some sharks, where multiple individuals might converge on wounded or vulnerable prey. Each predator is acting in its own interest rather than cooperating with the others, but the effect from the prey's perspective is similar to a coordinated attack. Mob hunting requires less cognitive sophistication than cooperative hunting and might have been more common among dinosaur predators. Regardless of whether they hunted in packs, as mobs, or as solitary individuals, theropod predators would have used the landscape to their advantage. Ambush sites where visibility was limited, where a predator could hide and wait for prey to approach, would have been valuable hunting territories. The edges between different habitat types, where forest met grassland, where rivers flowed through otherwise dry areas, where rocky outcrops provided cover, would have been particularly productive hunting grounds. Prey animals moving between habitats would have needed to cross these transitional zones, and predators would have learned to position themselves along commonly used routes. Water sources, as we have mentioned before, were natural ambush sites. Every animal needs water, and in many environments, water sources were limited and predictable. A predator that positioned itself near a watering hole could be confident that prey would eventually come to it. The question was simply whether the predator had the patience to wait, and whether it could remain undetected long enough for prey to approach within striking distance. For a large predator that needed to eat only occasionally, waiting near water for days or even weeks until an opportunity presented itself would have been a viable strategy. This brings us to the crocodilians, the masters of the water's edge ambush. Crocodilians have existed for more than 200 million years, predating the dinosaurs and surviving long after their extinction. Throughout this immense span of time, they have maintained a remarkably consistent body plan because it is so supremely well adapted to their ecological niche. A crocodilian is essentially a living trap, a predator so well camouflaged and so patient that it can wait indefinitely for prey to make the fatal mistake of approaching too close to the water. The crocodilians of the Mesozoic included species that dwarf any alive today. Dinosaurs, which lived in North America during the late Cretaceous, reached lengths of up to 35 feet, with a skull measuring over 5 feet. This was an apex predator of aquatic and shoreline environments, capable of taking prey as large as full-grown dinosaurs. Fossil evidence directly confirms that Dinosaurs fed on dinosaurs. Bite marks on dinosaur bones that match the dentition of Dinosaurs, dinosaur bones found in association with Dinosaurs fossils, and even what appear to be Dinosaurs coprolites containing dinosaur bone fragments all point to regular predation on dinosaurs. Sarcosuchus from the early Cretaceous of Africa was even larger, potentially reaching lengths of 40 feet and weights of several tons. This massive crocodilian lived in river systems and would have been the dominant predator in its aquatic environment. Any dinosaur that came to the river to drink or attempted to cross the river would have been potential prey. The attack would have followed the pattern we see in modern crocodilians: patient waiting, motionless in the water with only the eyes and nostrils above the surface, then a sudden explosive rush when prey came within range. The massive jaws would close with tremendous force. The teeth, while not designed for cutting like those of theropods, would have held the prey in an unbreakable grip. The crocodilian would then drag its victim into deeper water, using the death roll technique, spinning rapidly while holding the prey to drown it and tear off chunks of flesh. For dinosaurs, crossing rivers would have been among the most dangerous activities they engaged in. Modern river crossings by migrating herbivores provide us with analogs for what these ancient events might have looked like. Thousands of animals gathering at the river's edge, hesitating, the herd's collective fear of the water palpable. Eventually, some individuals would enter the water and the rest would follow, driven by the need to reach the other side. The crossing would be chaotic, with animals swimming, some struggling in the current, young becoming separated from their mothers. And the predators would be waiting. Crocodilians would attack from the water, seizing swimming dinosaurs and dragging them under. Theropod predators might have waited on the far bank, picking off animals as they emerged from the water, exhausted from the swim and disoriented. Flying pterosaurs could have swooped down to snatch small dinosaurs. The river crossing would have been a bonanza for predators, an event that occurred seasonally and provided concentrated hunting opportunities that the predators would have learned to anticipate. The fossil record preserves some evidence of these mass crossings and their associated carnage. Bone beds containing the remains of numerous individuals of herbivorous species, sometimes mixed with the remains of predators, have been interpreted as the result of failed river crossings or other mass death events. While we must be cautious about these interpretations, bones can be transported by water and accumulated in deposits that do not necessarily represent where the animals died. Some of these sites do seem to capture catastrophic events where many animals perished in a short period of time. The marine realm presents another aspect of the dangers dinosaurs faced, particularly for species that lived in coastal environments or on islands. The oceans of the Mesozoic were not dominated by dinosaurs, but by different groups of reptiles that had returned to the sea and evolved specialized adaptations for aquatic life. The ichthyosaurs, which resembled dolphins in body shape, were fast-swimming predators that hunted fish and other marine prey. The plesiosaurs, with their long necks and flippers, were diverse and included both fish eaters with small heads and long necks and apex predators with massive heads and short necks. The mosasaurs, which appeared later in the Cretaceous, were relatives of modern monitor lizards that had become fully aquatic and included some of the largest marine predators of the Mesozoic. For a dinosaur wading into coastal waters, these marine predators represented a threat from an alien world, creatures operating under different rules than the terrestrial predators the dinosaur had evolved to deal with. A mosasaur attacking from below, surging up from deeper water to seize a dinosaur by the leg, would have been nearly impossible to detect before it was too late. The dinosaur would have been dragged into deeper water where its adaptations for terrestrial life became liabilities. Unable to breathe underwater, unable to use its legs effectively for swimming, unable to fight back against a predator designed for aquatic combat, the dinosaur would have drowned. We have some evidence that such predation occurred. Mosasaur teeth have been found embedded in the bones of plesiosaurs and other marine reptiles, and there are isolated finds of dinosaur bones in marine deposits with damage that might have been caused by marine predators. The evidence is fragmentary, but it suggests that the boundary between land and sea was a dangerous zone where terrestrial dinosaurs could fall victim to marine predators, and where marine predators occasionally ventured into shallow water to hunt shoreline prey. Islands would have been particularly dangerous for dinosaurs in this regard. Many dinosaur species lived on islands, either because they were trapped there when sea levels rose and cut off land connections, or because they colonized islands through swimming or rafting. Island dinosaur populations often evolved reduced body size, a phenomenon known as insular dwarfism that occurs when resources are limited and smaller body sizes are advantageous. But small size made these island dinosaurs even more vulnerable to marine predators. A dwarf sauropod, perhaps 10 feet long instead of the 60 feet its mainland relatives reached, would have been an ideal prey item for a large mosasaur or shark. The seas also contained sharks, which had already been apex predators for hundreds of millions of years before the Mesozoic began, and continued in that role throughout the age of dinosaurs and beyond. Some Mesozoic sharks reached enormous sizes and would have been capable of taking large prey, including dinosaurs. While direct evidence of shark predation on dinosaurs is rare, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, particularly for events that would have occurred in the ocean where fossilization is less likely to occur than on land. The beaches and shorelines themselves represented transitional zones where dangers from both realms could converge. A nesting site on a beach, chosen because the sand was ideal for incubation and because beaches might have had fewer terrestrial predators than inland sites, would nonetheless have been vulnerable to marine predators. A crocodilian could have hauled itself onto the beach to raid nests. Marine turtles, which also existed throughout the Mesozoic, might have competed for nesting sites. And hatchlings making their way from the nest to the water or to inland habitats would have been vulnerable to both terrestrial and marine predators. We should consider the sensory world that dinosaurs inhabited, the information available to them about their environment, and the threats it contained. Different species would have relied on different senses to varying degrees, just as modern animals do. Visual predators like hawks rely primarily on sight, while others like dogs use smell as their primary sense, and still others like bats use echolocation. Dinosaurs would have shown similar variation in sensory capabilities and the relative importance of different senses. Many theropod dinosaurs appear to have had excellent vision. The large eye sockets in their skulls, the forward-facing orientation of the eyes in some species providing binocular vision, and the enlarged optic regions of their brains all suggest that vision was crucial for these predators. Color vision may have been present, as it is in modern birds. The ability to detect motion would have been especially important for predators tracking moving prey. Some theropods may have had vision acute enough to spot potential prey from great distances, much as modern predatory birds can see small animals from high in the sky. Herbivorous dinosaurs would also have needed good vision, though for different reasons. Detecting approaching predators, maintaining contact with herd members, identifying edible plants, and navigating through complex environments all require effective vision. The placement of eyes on the sides of the head, common in herbivorous dinosaurs, provided a wide field of view that would have made it difficult for predators to approach unseen, though at the cost of reduced binocular vision and depth perception compared to forward-facing eyes. Smell would have been important for many dinosaurs, particularly for finding food and detecting predators that might not yet be visible. The size of the olfactory regions of the brain, which can be inferred from skull structure, varied considerably among dinosaur species. Some theropods, including tyrannosaurs, had enlarged olfactory bulbs suggesting a keen sense of smell. This has been interpreted as evidence that they may have scavenged carrion, using smell to locate carcasses from great distances. But a good sense of smell would also have been useful for predators tracking living prey, following scent trails, or detecting prey hidden in dense vegetation. Hearing capabilities varied among dinosaurs as well. Some hadrosaurs had elaborate cranial crests that appear to have functioned as resonating chambers for producing low-frequency sounds. If they were producing these sounds, presumably for communication, then they must also have been able to hear them. Low-frequency sounds travel well through dense vegetation and over long distances, making them ideal for maintaining contact between herd members or warning of danger. Other dinosaurs may have communicated using higher frequency sounds or may have relied less on vocal communication. The ability to detect vibrations through the ground, common in many modern animals, may also have been important for dinosaurs. Elephants today can detect the footsteps of other elephants from miles away through seismic vibrations traveling through the ground. Large dinosaurs producing similar vibrations as they walked would have been detectable to other dinosaurs with the appropriate sensory capabilities. A predator able to detect the approach of potential prey through ground vibrations would have had an advantage, as would prey able to detect approaching predators through the same mechanism. These various senses combined to create a perceptual world that would have been rich with information, but also with uncertainty and ambiguity. A sound in the night might be a predator or simply the wind moving through vegetation. A scent on the breeze might indicate a nearby predator or might be hours old, the predator long gone. A movement glimpsed peripherally might be a threat or simply a harmless animal. Dinosaurs would have needed to constantly assess these sensory inputs, distinguishing real threats from false alarms and responding appropriately to each. The cost of errors in this assessment would have been high. Failing to recognize a real threat could result in death, but overreacting to false alarms had costs as well. Time spent fleeing from imaginary dangers was time not spent feeding, resting, or engaging in other necessary activities. Energy expended in unnecessary flight was energy that could have been used for growth or reproduction. Natural selection would have favored individuals that struck the right balance, that were appropriately cautious without being paralyzed by constant fear. We should also consider the temporal dimensions of danger. The threats that dinosaurs faced varied not just by location, but also by time of day and time of year. As we have discussed, night was the domain of mammalian predators, while day was when most dinosaur predators were active. The transition periods, dawn and dusk, would have been particularly dangerous as both diurnal and nocturnal predators might be active. These twilight hours would have required special vigilance. Seasonal variations in danger would have been equally important. The breeding season brought its own vulnerabilities, with males distracted by competition for mates and both sexes focused on reproduction rather than predator avoidance. The nesting season concentrated dinosaurs in predictable locations, making them easier targets for predators. The dry season, when food and water were scarce, forced animals to take risks they might avoid during times of plenty, venturing into dangerous areas to access the resources they needed to survive. The wet season, while providing abundant food and water, brought its own dangers in the form of floods, landslides, and other hazards associated with heavy rainfall. Long-term climatic cycles would have created additional temporal variations in danger. The Mesozoic experienced significant climate changes over its 185 million year span, with periods of global warmth alternating with cooler intervals, changes in precipitation patterns, and shifts in sea level. These climate changes would have altered ecosystems, changing the distributions of plants and animals, creating new habitats and destroying old ones. Dinosaur species would have needed to adapt to these changing conditions or face extinction. Those species that could track shifting habitats, that were flexible enough to exploit new food sources, and that could cope with new predators and competitors would have survived. Those that were too specialized or too inflexible would have perished. The fossil record shows us that dinosaur faunas did indeed change over time, with new species appearing and old ones going extinct in a constant turnover. This turnover was driven by the same forces that shape modern ecosystems: competition, predation, environmental change, and random chance. No species existed unchanged for the entire Mesozoic. Even the most successful dinosaur lineages evolved continuously, producing new species as old ones died out. This brings us to consider extinction at multiple scales. Individual organisms die, that is inevitable. Populations can go extinct, disappearing from particular areas while the species persists elsewhere. Species go extinct with the last individual dying and the species disappearing forever from Earth. And lineages, whole groups of related species, can go extinct, as happened to the non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. Each of these levels of extinction had different causes and different consequences, but all were part of the constant reshaping of life that characterized the Mesozoic. For individual dinosaurs, death came from the myriad dangers we have discussed: predation, disease, parasitism, injury, starvation, environmental catastrophe. The specific cause of death for any particular individual was often a matter of chance, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But patterns emerged at the population level. Certain age classes suffered higher mortality than others. Certain seasons were more dangerous than others. Certain habitats were riskier than others. These patterns shaped the evolution of behavior and physiology, as individuals whose traits helped them avoid the most common causes of death were more likely to survive and reproduce. Population extinctions occurred when local conditions became unfavorable for a species. A drought might eliminate a population that depended on a particular water source. A new predator species arriving in an area might prey on a local population to the point of extinction. Disease could wipe out isolated populations. These local extinctions were constantly occurring throughout the Mesozoic, removing populations from parts of their range. But as long as the species survived somewhere, it could potentially recolonize areas where it had gone locally extinct, given time and appropriate conditions. Species extinctions, the complete disappearance of a species from Earth, occurred when all populations died out without leaving descendant species. This could happen gradually, as the species range contracted over time until only one population remained and that population finally died out. Or it could happen suddenly in catastrophic events that killed all members of the species simultaneously or in such rapid succession that recovery was impossible. Throughout the Mesozoic, species were constantly going extinct, though normally at rates low enough that new species appearing through evolution roughly balanced the losses. But there were exceptional times when extinction rates spiked dramatically, periods known as mass extinctions. The Mesozoic was bracketed by two of the most severe mass extinctions in Earth's history. The end Permian extinction, which occurred just before the beginning of the Mesozoic, was the most severe extinction event known, eliminating perhaps 95% of all species. This catastrophe cleared the ecological stage and allowed the surviving lineages, including the ancestors of dinosaurs, to radiate and diversify. The end Cretaceous extinction, which occurred at the very end of the Mesozoic, eliminated the non-avian dinosaurs along with many other groups and again reshaped life on Earth. Between these bookend catastrophes, the Mesozoic experienced at least one other significant extinction event, the end Triassic extinction, which occurred roughly 200 million years ago. This event eliminated many of the competitors and predators that had coexisted with early dinosaurs, possibly opening ecological opportunities that allowed dinosaurs to become dominant in terrestrial ecosystems. The causes of this extinction event remain debated, with volcanic activity, climate change, and asteroid impact all proposed as possible triggers. The most famous extinction event, the end Cretaceous event that ended the age of dinosaurs, was almost certainly caused by a combination of factors, with the impact of a massive asteroid playing a starring role. The impact, which occurred in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, created a crater more than 100 miles across and unleashed catastrophic environmental changes. The immediate effects included earthquakes, tsunamis, wildfires on a global scale, and a massive injection of debris into the atmosphere that blocked sunlight for months or years. The longer-term effects included dramatic cooling, acid rain, and the collapse of food webs as photosynthesis was shut down and plant communities died. In the context of our exploration of the dangers facing dinosaurs, the end Cretaceous extinction represents the ultimate danger, a catastrophe so severe that it overwhelmed all the adaptations that had allowed dinosaurs to thrive for more than 150 million years. Size, strength, intelligence, social behavior, parental care, none of these mattered in the face of environmental catastrophe on such a scale. The largest and most powerful dinosaurs died alongside the smallest and weakest. The fastest and most alert predators perished with their prey. The catastrophe did not discriminate based on the qualities that had allowed species to survive everyday dangers. It killed indiscriminately, based largely on ecological position and random chance. But even this catastrophic extinction did not eliminate all dinosaurs. One lineage survived, the birds, which are technically dinosaurs that evolved the ability to fly. The survival of birds tells us something important about the nature of extinction events. It was not simply that all dinosaurs were killed. Rather, certain ecological characteristics made survival more likely. Small body size was probably advantageous, as small animals require less food and can shelter more easily. Omnivorous or generalist diets were probably beneficial, as specialists that depended on specific food sources would have died when those sources disappeared. The ability to fly may have helped birds access resources that terrestrial animals could not reach, and simple random chance played a role, as some populations happened to be in locations where conditions were slightly less catastrophic than elsewhere. The survivors of the end Cretaceous extinction inherited a devastated but recovering world. With the non-avian dinosaurs gone, mammals began to diversify and fill the ecological roles that dinosaurs had occupied. Birds, too, diversified dramatically, though they remained smaller than they had been during the Cretaceous and never reclaimed the terrestrial dominance that their non-avian relatives had possessed. The world of the Cenozoic, the era following the Mesozoic, would be shaped by mammals and birds rather than by non-avian dinosaurs. but for 165 million years, from the late Triassic to the end of the Cretaceous, dinosaurs had been the dominant large terrestrial animals on Earth. During that immense span of time, they had evolved into an extraordinary diversity of forms, from chicken-sized predators to herbivores that weighed as much as 50 tons, from bipedal runners to quadrupedal browsers, from carnivores to herbivores to omnivores. They had colonized every terrestrial environment on Earth, from polar regions to deserts, from lowland forests to mountain slopes, from continents to oceanic islands. And throughout this entire reign, they had faced constant dangers. The narrative of simple dominance of dinosaurs as invulnerable rulers of their world is false. The reality was far more complex and far more interesting. Dinosaurs were successful not because they were safe, but because they were adaptable. They evolved strategies for dealing with the constant threats they faced, from predators to parasites to environmental hazards. Some of these strategies were morphological, armor, weapons, size. Others were behavioral, herding, parental care, vigilance. And others were physiological, rapid growth rates, sophisticated immune systems, metabolic flexibility. The individual dinosaur experiencing life in the Mesozoic would not have seen itself as the ruler of anything. It would have experienced a constant struggle for survival, a daily challenge to find enough food, avoid becoming food, cope with parasites and disease, navigate a complex social environment, and eventually reproduce. From the moment it began developing inside its egg, through the dangerous hatching period, the vulnerable juvenile stage, and into adulthood, its life would have been shaped by danger and the need to avoid it. The egg stage, as we have explored, was fraught with peril. Nest predators of many kinds sought out eggs as concentrated packages of nutrition. Snakes, mammals, small dinosaurs, and other predators raided nests whenever the opportunity presented itself. Environmental hazards threatened as well, with floods, temperature extremes, and other factors potentially destroying entire clutches. The embryo developing inside the egg was utterly helpless, dependent on the protection provided by the shell and whatever defenses its parents had evolved. Hatching brought mobility and the ability to flee from danger, but it also brought exposure to a wider range of threats. The newly hatched dinosaur, small and vulnerable, was potential prey for an enormous variety of predators. Its survival depended on factors largely beyond its control, whether it hatched in a location with adequate cover, whether predators happened to be nearby, whether its parents provided protection. Those hatchlings fortunate enough to survive the first days and weeks began the process of growth that would eventually carry them towards safety, but that process took time during which they remained vulnerable. The juvenile stage was a time of slightly reduced danger as growth provided increasing protection from the smallest predators, but new threats emerged, including predators large enough to kill juveniles but not adults. The juvenile dinosaur navigated a changing landscape of danger, constantly reassessing which creatures posed threats and which could be safely ignored. This required learning, the ability to recognize and remember dangerous situations and to modify behavior accordingly. Those individuals that learned quickly and remembered well were more likely to survive. Reaching adulthood marked a transition to relative safety for many dinosaur species. The largest adults, particularly of the giant sauropod species, were effectively invulnerable to predation under normal circumstances. Medium-sized adults faced reduced but still real predation pressure. Even for the safest adults, however, danger had not disappeared. Intraspecific competition could result in serious injury or death. Environmental hazards remained a threat. Disease and parasitism continued to drain energy and reduce fitness. And always there was the possibility of the unexpected: a fall, a flood, a landslide, a wildfire, any of the countless ways that death could come. Throughout their lives, dinosaurs would have been engaged in a constant risk assessment and management process. Every decision, from where to feed to when to drink to whether to flee from a potential threat, involved weighing risks against potential rewards. Feed in the open where food is abundant but visibility is high and predators can approach unseen. Or feed in dense cover where safety is greater but food is less plentiful. Drink now while the herd is at the water, accepting the risks of the water's edge but benefiting from the many eyes watching for danger. Or wait until later when risks might be lower but thirst will be more severe. These decisions, made countless times each day, cumulatively determined whether an individual dinosaur would survive. Natural selection operated on the outcomes of these decisions. Individuals that made good decisions more often than bad ones survived at higher rates and contributed more genes to the next generation. Over evolutionary time, this process refined decision-making abilities, producing dinosaurs with instincts and learning capabilities tuned to their specific ecological circumstances. The social environment added another layer of complexity to the dangers dinosaurs faced. For species that lived in groups, relationships with other group members were crucial. Dominance hierarchies determined access to resources. Social bonds provided protection and support, but social living also brought conflicts, competition, and the possibility of aggression from group members. A young dinosaur growing up in a herd would need to learn not just about predators and environmental hazards, but also about the social dynamics of the herd, where it fit in the hierarchy, which individuals were allies and which were rivals. Mating season brought its own particular dangers, especially for males of species where males competed directly for access to females. Combat between rival males could be fierce, with serious injuries or even death resulting from fights over mates. The weapons that evolved for defense against predators, horns, tail clubs, thickened skulls, were often used in these intraspecific battles. A male ceratopsian with massive horns or a pachycephalosaur with a thickened skull dome would have used these structures in combat with rivals. While much of this combat may have been ritualized, following instinctive rules that minimized the risk of serious injury, not all encounters would have ended safely for both participants. Females faced different dangers during the reproductive season. The physiological demands of egg production required significant energy and nutrients. A female producing dozens of eggs needed to consume large quantities of calcium and protein, nutrients that might not always be readily available. The process of nesting, finding suitable sites and preparing them, took time and energy away from vigilance and feeding. And for species that provided parental care, the period of guarding eggs and raising young was a time of intense energy expenditure and increased vulnerability to predation. The dangers we have discussed throughout this exploration were not isolated phenomena, but interconnected elements of complex ecosystems. A drought that reduced plant growth would reduce the food available to herbivorous dinosaurs, weakening them and making them more vulnerable to predation. The weakened herbivores would be easier prey for predators, allowing predator populations to increase. But eventually, as the herbivore populations declined from the combined effects of starvation and increased predation, food would become scarce for the predators as well, and predator populations would crash. This kind of population cycling, driven by the interactions between predators and prey and modulated by environmental conditions, would have been characteristic of Mesozoic ecosystems just as it is of modern ones. Disease dynamics would have been similarly complex. A population stressed by drought or food scarcity would have been more susceptible to disease, as individuals' immune systems were compromised by malnutrition. Disease outbreaks could then cause population declines that extended beyond what starvation alone would have caused. Parasites would have thrived when host populations were dense and stressed, and would have declined when host populations crashed. The web of interactions among all these factors created ecosystems that were dynamic and constantly changing, never reaching a stable equilibrium but always in flux. Human observers, if we could have witnessed these Mesozoic ecosystems in action, would have been struck by their familiarity in some ways and their alien strangeness in others. The basic dynamics of predator and prey, of competition and cooperation, of birth and death, are universal principles that apply in any ecosystem. In those broad patterns, Mesozoic ecosystems would have seemed familiar, but in the details, in the specific forms of the organisms involved and the particular ways they interacted, these ecosystems would have been utterly unlike anything in the modern world. A herd of hadrosaurs moving through a forest would have presented a spectacle of sound and movement that has no modern equivalent. Hundreds of large animals, each weighing several tons, browsing on vegetation, communicating with low-frequency calls that reverberated through the forest, the young sheltered among the adults, all moving as a coordinated unit. The vigilance of the herd would have been constant, with individuals periodically raising their heads to scan for danger, alert for any sign of predators. The approach of a large theropod would have triggered alarm responses that rippled through the herd, causing it to bunch together for defense or to flee, depending on the circumstances. A nesting ground of large sauropods would have been another remarkable sight. Vast areas of disturbed earth where females had dug pits for their eggs, the covered nests radiating warmth from the decomposing vegetation used to incubate the eggs, perhaps some females still present guarding their nests while others had already departed. The air would have been filled with the scent of vegetation and earth, and with the subtle sounds of eggs cracking as hatchlings emerged. And all around, the predators would have gathered, snakes sliding between the nests, small theropods darting in to snatch hatchlings, mammals waiting for nightfall when they could raid more safely. A river crossing during a migration would have been chaos incarnate. Hundreds or thousands of dinosaurs gathering at the river's edge, the front ranks hesitating while those behind pressed forward, the tension building until finally some individuals entered the water and the rest followed in a rush. The sound would have been overwhelming, splashing, bellowing, the cries of young separated from their mothers. In the water, crocodilians would have attacked, seizing swimming dinosaurs and dragging them under. On both banks, predators would have been active, taking advantage of the confusion and the exhausted state of animals emerging from the water. And in the air, pterosaurs would have circled, watching for opportunities to snatch small dinosaurs or to scavenge from the casualties of the crossing. These dramatic scenes were punctuated by quieter moments that were no less significant for the individual dinosaurs involved. A young dinosaur learning to recognize edible plants by watching and imitating its mother. A juvenile successfully evading a predator for the first time, the experience teaching it valuable lessons about escape routes and the importance of vigilance. A female dinosaur selecting a nesting site, using instincts and perhaps memory of previous successful nests to choose a location that offered some protection from predators while meeting the environmental requirements for successful incubation. An adult male winning a confrontation with a rival, establishing dominance and gaining access to mates. Each of these moments, dramatic or mundane, was part of the lived experience of dinosaurs. And each was shaped by the dangers that formed the backdrop to all dinosaur life. The shadow of predation, the burden of parasitism, the threat of environmental catastrophe, these were not occasional intrusions into otherwise safe lives but constant presences that shaped every aspect of behavior and ecology. The scientific study of these ancient dangers relies on multiple lines of evidence, each providing pieces of a puzzle that we can never fully complete but can at least partially reconstruct. Fossils are the most direct evidence, providing us with the actual remains of ancient organisms and sometimes preserving evidence of their interactions. Trace fossils, including trackways, bite marks, and coprolites, tell us about behaviors and relationships that the organisms themselves might not preserve. Amber provides exceptional preservation of small organisms, particularly insects and other arthropods that are rarely fossilized in other contexts. And comparative biology, the study of modern organisms and their relationships, allows us to make informed inferences about extinct species based on their living relatives. Each type of evidence has its limitations. Fossils are rare and represent only a tiny fraction of the organisms that lived. The conditions required for fossilization are specific and unusual, meaning that most organisms decomposed completely without leaving any trace. This creates biases in the fossil record, with some types of organisms in some environments much better represented than others. Organisms with hard parts like bones and shells fossilize much more readily than soft-bodied organisms. Organisms living in environments where sediments are being deposited, like river deltas and coastal areas, are more likely to be fossilized than organisms living in upland areas where erosion dominates. And larger organisms are more likely to be found and recognized as fossils than smaller ones. These biases mean that our understanding of Mesozoic ecosystems is incomplete and skewed in predictable ways. We know far more about large dinosaurs than about small ones, more about dinosaurs living in lowland areas than those in mountains, more about dinosaurs with extensive hard tissue than about those with more cartilaginous skeletons. The small predators and parasites that probably caused much of the mortality among young dinosaurs are poorly represented in the fossil record compared to the large, dramatic predators that capture our imagination. The diseases that likely shaped dinosaur populations leave almost no trace in fossils. The daily dangers that dinosaurs faced, the near misses and the successful escapes, are invisible to us except in the rare cases where an attack or interaction was preserved. Despite these limitations, the accumulating evidence from fossils, trace fossils, amber, and comparative biology has allowed us to construct an increasingly detailed picture of life in the Mesozoic. Each new discovery adds detail to this picture, sometimes confirming previous hypotheses and sometimes challenging them and forcing revisions to our understanding. The discovery of Repenomamus with dinosaur remains in its stomach challenged the traditional view of mammal-dinosaur relationships. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs in China revolutionized our understanding of the origins of birds and the distribution of feathers among dinosaurs. The discovery of preserved parasites in amber revealed a hidden world of small dangers that had been largely invisible to previous researchers. Future discoveries will undoubtedly continue to refine and revise our understanding of the dangers that shaped dinosaur lives. New fossil sites, particularly those with exceptional preservation, may reveal interactions and relationships that are currently unknown to us. New analytical techniques may allow us to extract information from fossils that previous methods could not access, and new theoretical frameworks may help us interpret the evidence in ways that provide deeper insights into the functioning of Mesozoic ecosystems. But even with our current incomplete understanding, we can confidently say that the age of dinosaurs was not a time of simple dominance, but a time of complex, dangerous, interconnected ecosystems. Dinosaurs were successful not because they were invulnerable, but because they evolved adaptations for dealing with the constant dangers they faced. They were born into a world filled with threats, and those that survived to reproduce did so by successfully navigating a landscape of risk that included predation, parasitism, disease, competition, environmental hazards, and countless other dangers. The story we have told is ultimately a story about the universality of struggle in life. Every organism in every ecosystem at every point in Earth's history has faced challenges to its survival. The specific forms of these challenges vary. The predators differ, the parasites change, the environmental hazards take different forms, but the fundamental reality of struggle is universal. Dinosaurs, for all their magnificence and their long reign as dominant terrestrial animals, were not exempt from this reality. They lived dangerous lives in dangerous times, and their success was measured not by the absence of threats, but by their ability to survive despite them. This understanding should make us appreciate dinosaurs in a new way. They were not invincible giants ruling their world without challenge. They were complex organisms embedded in complex ecosystems, engaged in a constant struggle for survival, facing dangers from the moment they began developing inside their eggs until their final moments of life. They evolved remarkable adaptations for dealing with these dangers, from the morphological armor, weapons, size, to the behavioral herding, parental care, vigilance, to the physiological rapid growth, effective immune systems, sophisticated sensory capabilities, and they were successful. For more than 160 million years, dinosaurs thrived, diversified, and dominated terrestrial ecosystems. They survived environmental changes that wiped out many other groups. They adapted to new challenges as they arose. They evolved into an extraordinary range of forms, each suited to its particular ecological role. This long success, achieved in the face of constant danger, is testament to the effectiveness of their evolutionary adaptations. The end of the age of dinosaurs came not because dinosaurs were poorly adapted or vulnerable in everyday contexts, but because they faced a catastrophe of unprecedented scale, an event so severe that it overwhelmed adaptations that had proven successful for millions of years. The asteroid impact and its aftermath created environmental conditions so different from anything in previous dinosaur experience that survival became a matter of luck as much as adaptation. In such circumstances, even the most successful groups can be eliminated, but dinosaurs did not entirely disappear. Their descendants, the birds, survived the catastrophe and continue to thrive today. Every time we see a bird, we are seeing a living dinosaur, a representative of a lineage that has survived for more than 200 million years, through the rise and fall of numerous other groups, through multiple mass extinctions, through dramatic environmental changes. The survival of this lineage is a final testament to the evolutionary success of dinosaurs. As we conclude this exploration of the hidden dangers of the dinosaur world, we should reflect on what this knowledge tells us about life more broadly. The complexity of Mesozoic ecosystems, the web of interactions among predators and prey, parasites and hosts, competitors and cooperators, reminds us that no organism exists in isolation. Every species is embedded in a network of relationships, and its success or failure depends not just on its own adaptations, but on its interactions with countless other species and with the physical environment. The constant presence of danger in dinosaur lives reminds us that struggle is fundamental to life. Natural selection operates through differential survival and reproduction, meaning that some individuals must fail for others to succeed. This is not cruel, but simply the mechanism through which life adapts to changing conditions. The dangers that killed individual dinosaurs were the forces that shaped the evolution of defensive adaptations in their species. The predators that consumed young dinosaurs were themselves engaged in their own struggles for survival, facing their own dangers and challenges. The story of dinosaurs is ultimately a story about resilience, adaptation, and the intricate complexity of life. It is a story that continues to unfold as new discoveries provide new insights into these ancient ecosystems. And it is a story that connects the distant past to the present, reminding us that the world we inhabit today is shaped by billions of years of evolutionary history, of species evolving, interacting, struggling, and adapting to the challenges they faced. The age of dinosaurs was not a golden age of safety and simplicity. It was a time of danger and complexity, of constant challenge and remarkable adaptation. It was a time when every day brought new risks, and every individual that survived to adulthood had successfully navigated a gauntlet of threats. It was a time when the largest and most powerful creatures on Earth still lived under the shadow of predation, parasitism, and environmental hazard. And it was a time that demonstrates, perhaps more clearly than any other period in Earth's history, that dominance and vulnerability are not opposites but two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the complex reality of life in a changing world.